Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Economies and Neighbourhood Scrutiny panel this afternoon. I'm just going to ask the members of the panel to introduce themselves. So I'll start with myself. My name's Harpreet. I'm the chair of the Economies and Neighbourhood Scrutiny panel. John? You're on mute, John, sorry.
We just had that discussion. I'm John Taylor. I'm the one of the representatives for the Kirklees ward on the scrutiny panel.
Thank you. Richard?
Hi, yeah, Richard Eastwood, local councillor for Linley Ward.
Thank you. Martin?
Martin Bolt, councillor from Murfield Ward.
We did have Councillor Yusra Hussain with us, but unfortunately, I think we're all at some point having to deal with technical difficulties. So we've just lost her for a moment, but hopefully she will rejoin us. We've had apologies from Ailey Ogden as well, one of our co-op team members. So we'll move on to the minutes of the previous. Oh, with Councillor Hussain, you're back. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. It's Councillor Yusra Hussain from Kirklees, and it's Batley West Ward. And I do apologise in advance. My internet keeps going.
No worries, no worries. I think we've had a few like this recently. So no problem whatsoever. So minutes of the previous meeting, pages 1 to 6. Just want to check if everybody's okay to approve the minutes, especially those who were at the last meeting.
Move them, Chairman.
I'll move them if you want, Chair.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. So we've got a mover and a seconder, haven't we there, Martin? Brilliant. Thank you both. Appreciate that. Do any councillors have any interest to declare for this meeting? No interest to declare. If you do, we've got a form which you can do electronically. You can email in if needs be, but it sounds like everyone's okay. Admissions to the public. The meeting takes place in public via online, and thank you to our brilliant web technical colleagues who are supporting us in the background as well. So deputations and petitions. We don't have any deputations and petitions. We've received a number of submissions from members of the public because they relate to a specific item, which is item 8, major transport schemes. We will be covering those submissions then, and I will provide a summary of those submissions which officers can respond to in their presentations, and also where members of the panel can also respond to those. I think I've got a question from Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. As you just said there, we've got a number of members of the public present and also some councillors. I dislike the term observers because they're participants who are here for agenda item 8. Could I suggest that we bring that forward so that the members of the public and other non-committee members don't have to they can obviously sit through the subsequent item if they wish, but particularly members of the public who may have work to go to or other commitments, I think while they're here, we should deal with that item.
Just to say, there are no members of public in the meeting. We've had written submissions, so they will be dealt with. I will read a summary of those. I am keen to make sure that we cover the private rented sector housing support. My only thought is that if we don't go with that one first, we won't have much time for it as a second item. So I'm keen that we actually stick to the agenda as it is, if that's okay. And then that allows plenty of time. If we do need to run over, then that's absolutely fine, Martin. You know, okay. For me it is. I'd rather stick to the times, but I understand it's going to be an item that, you know, people will want to speak to, and I certainly won't be doing anything to reduce discussion on that. As long as no one's doing anything rude or aggressive, I certainly won't be cutting any discussion down. So I hope that's okay.
Okay, Chair, thanks.
Thank you. Just on public question time, the majority of the submissions from the members of the public that came in writing, they were happy for those submissions to be covered under item 8, but one resident Sarah Newton, she did want 2 questions covered in public question time. So we're going to take those now because she specified that, and I think it's right that we do that. So our colleague Jodie, who's our governance officer, is going to read those 2 questions. So over to you, Jodie.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so the first question is, do the alterations at Blacker Road Junction A629 contribute anything tangible to the overall objectives of Phase 5? The council themselves have highlighted there will only be a travel time saving between Calvary Arms Junction and Ainley Top from Kirklees Together, published on 16th of October 2018. There is a second question. Would you like to answer that and then come back to the second one, or read?
Given that I think they're on similar items, are you okay to ask both of the questions now?
Yes. So the second question is, in the public consultation carried out in 2018, the majority of respondents were against changes to Blacker Road Junction. In the Cabinet report published October 2018, the damage to the conservation area due to the loss of mature trees and architectural heritage at Blacker Road Junction is irreversible. Why risk damaging a major part of the beautiful gateway into Huddersfield for something that is questionable, for something that is of questionable benefit?
Okay, thank you, Jodie. Well, firstly, thanks to the resident Sarah Newton for asking those questions. I think she makes some very important points in those questions, particularly around the feasibility and particularly on the key points about the benefits of the scheme in terms of travel time, and she's also asking about the questionable benefit in relation to the loss of mature trees, which could be irreversible. Given that I'm not an expert in this area, I would like to get a response from one of the officers or cabinet members. So could I ask Richard Hollison to come in on the points that have been raised there in terms of the technical points, and Councillor McBride might also want to come in as well. So if I hand over to Richard first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Richard Hollinson from the Major Project Service. Yeah, good questions, important questions. These questions relate to one of the schemes on item 8, which is the A629 Halifax Road Phase 5 scheme. And so our answer to the first question, which was regarding alterations at Blacker Road Junction contributing anything tangible to the overall objectives of Phase 5, then officers' view is the Blacker Road improvements will bring benefits to air quality, noise and congestion relief, as well as leaving the area in a much better state of repair. Blacker Road, in conjunction with the Cavalry Arms to Ainley Top sections, will provide journey time savings along the corridor and wider network improvements. Chair, would you like me to go on to answer the second question now before you bring anybody else in?
Yes, please, if you could answer the second question, yeah.
In response to question number 2, which was about public consultation carried out in 2018 and changes to the Blacker Road Junction and issues to do with the conservation area. Officers' response to that is that in the public consultation of 2018, which we officers have carefully considered, most of the objections related to Blacker Road scheme were about the removal of a right turn, which was proposed at that time from Egerton Road into Egerton Grove Road. The right turn has since been removed in our designs so as to limit the impact on land take from adjacent properties. Consequently, there's a reduction in sort of harm to the conservation area. So officers have listened to those views. We were wanting to amend the scheme to do that. Many of the walls and heritage features need repair, rebuilding and maintaining in this area. Some elements are close to collapse, in part due to condition, but also due to conflict with existing trees. At some point in the future, either trees or parts of wall will need to be removed. The scheme will leave these features in better condition, with liability for future maintenance for the majority of the features passing from the private to the public. Chair, I ought to add that this particular scheme is going to be subject to a full planning application shortly, where which will obviously be subject to the full statutory process through the local planning authority, which will give obviously full potential for all these comments and issues to be heard and discussed fully as part of that planning application. So I'm sure we'll come back to this under item 8 as well, but that planning application process will allow, you know, the full consideration of all these comments and more. I hope that's okay, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. And Councillor McBride, did you want to respond?
Richard's made the key points. The main benefit of the Blacker Road scheme is to improve the signs at this junction. Undoubtedly they do. There's an echo, really bad echo. Are you getting this?
Councillor McBride, what I'll do is can everyone just go on mute, because sometimes that leads to an echo. We're all mute and then you can speak.
Okay. The echo's not there. As I was saying, the main benefit of the Blacker Road intervention is to improve the sightlines. But if you look at the detailed visual presentation of what the scheme might look like, I think nobody would be in any doubt that there is an improvement visually to this part of the scheme, because the trees that will replace what are woodland trees will be ones which will go to a lower level and be more appropriate for this kind of development in the centre of a town. So I think it's a net plus. The major benefits to be created in time terms are not at this junction, but further up. However, there's benefits all along from this. And the scheme is part of a £129 million linkage between Huddersfield and Halifax. And there is no doubt over that period there's an immense benefit to all the traffic. And one's got to bear in mind that any improvements in terms of time may not look very impressive, but as this is by far the most used road in Kirklees, then any amount of saving on time is a huge. You've got to multiply by the number of vehicles. And if you put that figure together, there is a very significant impact in terms of carbon. But overall, the main benefit at this juncture is the improvement of the sightlines.
Okay, thank you for your responses to that question. I'm not going to take any more comments right now. We have got item 8 where we can cover this. I'm just aware we've got private sector housing that we need to cover as well. So Martin, if you just take a note of what you wanted to say, we will certainly cover it in item 8. Okay, so I'm going to move on to just checking I'm not missing anything. I keep hearing things coming up now. I think that's okay. So I'm going to move on to private rented housing sector support, and this is we're covering some of the support that was provided to the private rented housing sector as a result of COVID-19. So I think Joanne's going to kick off with the presentation. So shall I hand over to Joanne?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank you for taking this report around the private sector housing. Helen's going to take you through the report. It focuses on the work that we've done across the service around responding to supporting this particular sector through COVID. And I think there are a number of questions posed within it around our ongoing support as the pandemic plays its way out. But at this point, I'll hand over to Helen.
Thank you. Just before Helen comes in, I'm just going to say that we're joined by Chris Friend, who's one of the co-optees. So nice to see you, Chris. And also one of our other co-optees, Andrew Bird, might pop up on the screen. He's just struggling to get through on his link. So just in case, it's just for members of the public, so they are aware. So yes, Helen, off you go. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Thank you very much. I'm just going to go through some of the key points from the report and summarise some of them. More of the detail obviously is in the report that's been circulated with your papers. So the Council's Housing Solutions Service offers information and advice on the legal rights and responsibilities of private rented sector tenants and landlords, and also lettings agents. We've got good links with the National Residential Landlords Association, and we maintain those links in order that we can try to aim to bring help and support to professionalise the local private rented market. Just by way of context, there's around 17% of the council, of the stock within Kirklees Council is private rented sector. That's around 36,000 homes. I think it's fair to say, however, that from a housing solutions point of view, we tend to provide information and advice in the main to those who are living in the more affordable end of the private rented sector. The main areas of intervention that we take part in are regard property repair, property disrepair, and those are linked mainly to sort of health and safety issues of living in that accommodation. We also deal with tenancy relations matters. For example, any harassment or illegal eviction action that might be taking place. We also do the mandatory licensing of houses in multiple occupation. So those are where residents are sharing an accommodation and facilities. And again, by way of context, we've got around just over 300 mandatory houses and multiple occupation across the district. In Housing Solutions, we also deal with in people who are perhaps threatened with homelessness as a result of the loss of an assured short-hold tenancy in the private rented sector. What we try to do through our work is to resolve disputes between landlords and tenants through mediation or negotiation, but where it is necessary, we do also take enforcement action. In terms of the COVID response and what we've been doing for the last 12 months now, I guess, in the main, all of our staff have been working from home in line with many other staff across the council. So we've moved much more to a telephone service and an online service. However, sorry, I've just been asked to turn my camera on, so apologies for that. So we obviously, in terms of the COVID response, we are working from home, as I say. During lockdown 1, however, whilst all essential home visits, non-essential home visits rather, were stopped and paused, we did continue to carry out essential home visits where there were emergency hazards identified within the property. So we wanted to make sure that tenants were safe in their homes. Of course, we did that in line with safe working practices, and we also carried out bespoke COVID-related risk assessments to make sure that the residents and the staff were as safe as possible through doing those inspections. In terms of the further months, we've continued to develop our safe ways of working, and we've revised our approach to dealing with enquiries and complaints, again in line with national and corporate guidance, just to make sure that everyone is safe as possible. Just for information, I think during the COVID pandemic, we have received fewer reports than we have in previous years. I think in terms of the last 12 months, we've seen a reduction of about 13% of disrepair claim enquiries, but that nevertheless means that we have carried out just short of 1,000, investigations and inquiries on behalf of tenants. And with regard to tenancy relations issues, again, 18% lower than a normal year, but again, just short of 180 inquiries that we've been able to assist people with through that period. We are conscious, I think, like many other areas, that once the restrictions are lifted in terms of COVID restrictions, but in particular the restrictions on the ban of evictions, which at the moment has been extended to the 31st of March, we're conscious that it's likely that we will see an increase in the number of people approaching us from the private rented sector who found themselves to be in difficulty through paying their rent. Just worth noting as well that landlords also are struggling. They do rely often on the rent they receive to actually pay their mortgages on those properties. So there is the potential that landlords may also have their properties repossessed. It's hard at this point in time to actually quantify how many additional people will approach us for assistance through that period as we move forward. But there's been a recent report done nationally which has suggested that around 6% of the private rented sector nationally are in some sort of arrears with their rent payments, whether it be, you know, completely or just partially in arrears. Now, whether that's going to be replicated here in Kirklees, we still need to wait to see what the impact has been. But we have been continuing to provide support and information to any private rented tenants that do contact us, make sure that they're signposted to the appropriate advice agencies for any support that they might need with welfare benefits, etc., or just dealing with any debt that they might have. In order to support some of our most vulnerable residents throughout the period, we've focused, along with others in the council, on targeting some bespoke communications and information. And for us, that's been particularly focused on those people living in shared accommodation, so the houses in multiple occupation that we're aware of. Just to make sure that the messages around COVID and keeping safe have been heard and understood, to try and keep people as safe as possible. And obviously, as we move forward into the vaccination programme, we're trying to ensure that anyone that we do have contact with understands how they can take up the vaccine once they're offered it, and make sure that people are registered with their GPs, etc., so that they know how to get contacted. I think throughout the period as well, we've also continued to try and support people to find and secure private rented sector homes. We do that through the provision of bonds, we negotiate rent in advance, and we try and ensure that people can access good quality accommodation that they can afford. It's fair to say, however, as you might expect, that turnover in the private rented sector has been a lot lower, as it has been in the social rented sector as well. Many people obviously staying put, not moving out, and clearly the evictions ban has meant that there hasn't been any people leaving properties that have been evicted. So it is a slowing market, but as I say, we are anticipating, unfortunately, as things go forward, that we will start to receive many more inquiries from people in that particular sector. I know you've got a busy agenda, so I'll leave it there and just ask if there are any comments or questions that anyone might like to ask. And just to say that, sorry, Stephen Cale, who's the operational manager, he's also on the call, who may be able to assist with any inquiries or questions you might have.
Thank you, Helen, and thanks for that presentation, and also to colleagues who have been working through this challenging time. Members, do we have any questions? I've got a couple, so I can go first. Yeah, I'll go first. I just wanted to ask, I mean, the inspection process you mentioned, we've had less inspections during the COVID period, during 2020, which is quite understandable, really, I guess, with everything that's going on, and be interesting to see how much that is due to demand or how much of that is due to people just perhaps not wanting to get in contact at this time. But can I just ask you about the process around inspections? So once the inspection takes place, and say if the inspector thinks, well, there's some disrepair here, there's some items that need repairing, or something needs sorting out with mold or whatever, what happens at that stage? What expectation do we have of the landlord making changes? And if any changes aren't made by the landlord, what kind of follow-up or enforcement can we do after that?
Can I ask Steve to come in and answer that question? Thank you.
Of course. Hi, Steve.
Yes, certainly. Hi, councillors. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, with respect to disrepair, usually what happens, and certainly what's been happening now, is that in the first stage, someone from our triage service would be contacting the tenant and asking them a few questions about the disrepair, about whether they've been in touch with the landlord, whether the landlord's done any work, or whether there's delays in it. If from that it still seems apparent that there is disrepair and that the landlord's not been acting upon it, it goes through to our compliance team, and that is where they would then arrange with the tenant to go out and visit the property to be invited in by the tenants. What's happened during COVID, obviously, is that it's been a risk-based assessment, and as you sort of alluded to earlier, most of those lower numbers, it's sort of been self-selecting. Quite often people have assessed it themselves and thought, I don't want people inside my house at this moment in time. They may ring up for some advice and assistance, and then by all means contact us later on. So it's been sort of self-selecting in many ways. What would then happen when an inspector goes out? They have legislative inspections. It's under the Housing Act. It's called the Housing Health and Safety Rating System. And what they look at is what health and safety hazards exist within the property, hazards or nuisances. And that covers quite a range of different hazards. The most popular being trip, slips and falls, but also excess cold, so heating, hot water. They're the sort of big issues within private rented properties. So they would go out there, they would do an assessment of the house, looking at the hazards. It's quite a complicated matrix, but what they would do is they would look at the hazards and they'd look at who the occupants was, so what the family makeup was like, and then it would be a ratings-based system. They'd then assess to see what sort of hazards exist, significant hazards which are known as Category 1 hazards. They're the most serious, or Category 2, which are less serious. In the first instance, because it is the landlord's responsibility, they would go to the landlord to identify what the problems were, and they usually group it up in terms of both Cat 1, Cat 2s and ancillary things that they've found. More often than not, the landlord will act upon that. They should have acted upon it just when the tenants say so, but by our involvement, that helps a lot to facilitate that repair. If they fail to do so, or if the hazard is significant, at the same time we issue a notice, depending on which legislation we're using, either under the Housing Act or the Environmental Protection Act, which would give them a timescale, and the timescale would be dependent on how serious it is, to rectify the hazard. And as I say, more often than not, they would do that either through our informal action or through a notice period, and then failure to do that on the small number of occasions where they fail to do it, then we can proceed with that. Fairly recently, it's been the introduction of civil penalty notices, so it's a fixed penalty fine, or it can be prosecution in court. Alongside that, if they're not doing the work while that enforcement is going on, we might then commission property services to do the work, and then works in default to the landlord. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's really good. I'll just let some other members come in. Is there any other questions, members? No? Yes, Richard. Councillor Eastwood, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, hi. Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a quick question. We had a situation brought to our attention beginning of January by a resident of Linley, but for somebody who lived in Newsham Ward, where she was in private, in rented accommodation, private landlord, but the landlord had died 2 years ago. And I know there was a fair bit of to-ing and fro-ing, but the heating hadn't been working for like a long time, 2 or 3 young children, and just what process you go through to ensure that people like that are kept safe?
Yes, I'll answer that if that's okay, Councillor. Yeah, I think I am aware of that case. We were dealing in the first instance with, there wasn't an agent involved in it, but there was an executor. It was a solicitor firm, and those executors would still be responsible for it. So we were negotiating that they would then arrange for workmen to undertake that repair. So we still try and do, there is usually still some party responsible, and we'd then make sure we did the investigations to check that out. I don't actually know the outcome of that specific case, but I can look into it for you and respond separately. Okay,
thank you. I'll ask one final question then. you know, I really do appreciate that you've come here to speak about this. For me, I think those, and I think as Helen rightly said, it's those are probably on the low income scale that you're sort of the majority of cases that you're dealing with in terms of disrepairs or, you know, whatever that you need to get in touch with the resident about. And I just wanted to ask about more generally about, I know we've spoken about this before, Helen, about selective licensing schemes. Now there's some up, you know, across the country. The one closest that I'm aware of is in Oldham, and they're going through their sort of reconsultation period at the moment for selective licensing. I think when we talked about it previously, you didn't quite feel that Kirklees met the criteria for selective licensing, and I understand one of them is around low demand. From what I can remember, I might be wrong, you know, and issues around deprivation, antisocial behaviour, that sort of stuff. So for me, I think they can be quite useful things to put in place, and I'd love to see something like this, but I understand there is a criteria around it, and it'd just be interesting to know if we've had a relook at selective licensing, if you think there's if we have any different sort of thoughts around it currently for Kirklees.
We haven't looked at it again since we last spoke about it, Councillor. I think, as you rightly said, there are some quite strict criteria around applying for a selective licensing scheme. You have to do consultation, obviously, as well, if you meet those criteria. And obviously, you have to have sufficient numbers of properties in that low demand area. And also, one of the criteria is that you have tried every other tool of intervention to either prevent the to uplift the area or to deal with any major issues like antisocial behaviour or crime in a specific area. So you have to be able to evidence that you've gone through all of those prior steps and stages, and you've tried everything before you're likely to get a selective licensing scheme approved. They do continue to be approved across the country, but as I say, we haven't looked at it again since last time because we didn't think we had the sufficiency of the numbers in the areas that would enable us to meet the criteria at the time. We can always have another look at it for you. No problem.
Oh, thank you. I mean, personally, I know, and I do say this on a personal basis, I'm not speaking for the whole committee, but it's something, you know, for me, I think it'd be a really useful thing for us to review, and perhaps that's something that you could take away and consider, if that's okay.
Certainly.
Thank you. Okay, I think, yes, everyone's okay. Great stuff. Well, thank you so much for coming along, Helen, Stephen, Joanne, and anyone else who's on the call from your team as well. We really appreciate your time, and thanks to you and your colleagues for everything that you're doing. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks. Bye. Yeah, you can leave the meeting if you're here for private rented sector house. I can't say it properly. I get the words all muddled up. There you go. All right. Thank you very much, colleagues.
They can stay if they're so interested in transport.
They can. You absolutely can stay if you want. No one has to go. So we're going to move on to item 8, which is major transport schemes update. Now, members, just going to refer you back to the email that Sheila said. I understand that I might be echoing. Am I echoing at the moment, or can you hear me okay?
No, you're not getting any feedback at the moment.
Okay, all right, great stuff. So we got members of the panel and the officers and relevant cabinet member got the submissions that were sent in from members of the public yesterday, so that was shared with all of us. So what we're going to do, and this is the way Sheila's laid it out in her email, is that we will start off with summarising the submissions that we've received from members of the public. We've also got 2 councillors here who want to speak to this item. So we've got Councillor Patrick, and I think we have Councillor Firth. I can't quite see him, but I think he's also on the call on the meeting as well. So we will take those first. And then we'll move to the officers' presentations, and we'll ask them to respond to those submissions and the comments made from councillors in their presentation. If it isn't all picked up in that, we will come back and ask for responses, and obviously it'd be good to get Councillor McBride's response as well, and then we'll move to questions from the panel. So that's the order we're going to do it in. So hope that's okay with everybody. So Councillor Patrick and Councillor Faith will have up to 5 minutes to speak, and I know Councillor Patrick will also be representing or providing some submissions on behalf of his constituents as well. So I'm going to pass over to Councillor Patrick.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can you hear me? Well, hopefully it won't take 5 minutes of your time up. I'm here today to speak on the Holmfirth Town Centre Access Plan, as it's called. I want to speak on behalf of some of the shopkeepers who were unable to speak to you today. But to start with, I wanted to set this in context, basically, how we got to where we are now. So for some years now, myself and my ward colleagues have sought ways to improve the centre of Holmfirth. And when the local plan came along, that gave us another opportunity to lobby for the town centre's inclusion for road infrastructure improvements. That was successful, and we were thankful that combined authority money was identified and a scheme was drawn up by Kirklees Highways engineers. The purpose being to ease traffic congestion, or to put it another way, to increase traffic flows through the town. That scheme was rejected by the Cabinet following public consultation, and a new scheme was drawn up by Kirklees Highways engineers, which I call Plan B. Plan B was put to a more low-key consultation and rejected by some businesses in the town. Plan B was recently amended, but the objections remain. In order to enable traffic congestion easing, the first plan introduced a new link road and a one-way system. That scheme had the added bonus of enabling pavements to be widened and still allow for on-street parking and loading from both sides of Victoria Street. Plan B, by contrast, relies on the existing roads being used in the same way as they are now, but removing all parked vehicles from Victoria Street and from parts of Holligate. Plan B makes little difference to congestion easing and puts businesses at risk of closure. Plan B puts shops at risk of closure because it stops them using their side of the street for loading and unloading goods. Instead, they are expected to load and unload at the other side of the road, where there will be limited space, and carry their goods across 2 lanes of traffic. Take the baker, for example. He has deliveries every single day. He takes deliveries of flour every week. The lorry driver will be expected to park at the other side of the road from the shop and carry bags of flour across the road. That is, if the loading bays are not full. If the loading bays are full, there can be no delivery of flour. The baker also delivers to other shops and businesses. He's expected to carry trays across 2 lanes of traffic to his van. There has been no safety audit carried out. Today, he's told me that some of his suppliers have expressed health and safety concerns and have told him they will not deliver if these changes take place. The owner of the off license takes 2 to 3 deliveries a day. He says the goods are heavy, and he says he cannot carry his goods across a busy road. The newsagent at the top of the street relies on passing trade. That trade will be stopped by this scheme. The other businesses are closed due to the COVID pandemic. I don't think they know about the changes to Plan B. No one has contacted them as far as I know. There is little point spending millions on a scheme that closes shops and puts people out of work. Already this year, we will see the closure of Lloyds Bank and the Yorkshire Building Society on Victoria Street at the heart of the town. The one remaining butcher shop has also closed. Regeneration is not about sacrificing more shops to closure. It's about putting measures in place to attract businesses and growth. I'm asking that the council finds another way to improve the infrastructure, and if it is technically impossible to achieve, then the council seeks other sources of funding to carry out the improvements which are in the scheme that are not associated with congestion easing. We cannot put ourselves in a situation where the choice is to close the shops or take the money. There are other sources of government regeneration funding available that we can apply for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patrick. So I'll just take Councillor Firth now as well. So Councillor Firth, you've got up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've got an echo here. No, it's gone. Thank you, Chair. To follow on from Councillor Patrick, it's quite right in everything that he says. What has actually happened? The original plan for Home Fair was obviously thrown out. The people didn't want it, and then we came up with an alternative plan. The alternative plan was basically to put a loading bay on the north side of Victoria Street, which is used, or would be used, has been proved to be used about 15 to 20% of the time. Now, where I suggested it ought to go, which is the south side of Victoria Street, where it's used 99% of the time, that's the baker shop, or the Old Bridge Bakery, the local shop, and of course the shop at the top of the street, Charlesworth. They get deliveries quite a few times in the week. Now, as Nigel said, that Greg Christopher, the Bridge Baker, has been told by his delivery people they will not deliver to the opposite side of the street and be expected to carry bags of flour across the road, up the street and then down the back to the bakery. And we've got to remember, you know, if that bakery ever got closed down, it's been there as a bakery since 1853, which is just a year or two. And it's always managed to keep going, basically because the deliveries were never well, nobody ever talked about it. They came, they delivered, and they went. And that applied to both sides of the road. The butcher, we made a special area for the butcher shop. We cut down the zigzag lines in front of the zebra crossing so he could get a van in there to deliver his meat across to the shop. We haven't a butcher's shop there, but we may have one in the future, hopefully. The banks, Lloyd's Bank is about to close. I think when this virus disappears and we get back to normal, they will probably go. And the Huddersfield Building Society, we've talked to them, we've tried to ask them why they're going. They've made their mind up, they're going. So we'll finish up in Home Firth with one bank, Barclays, on 3 days. From about 5 or 6 banks a year or two ago, and a couple of 3 building societies, we're down to one bank open for 3 days a week, which is really, for commerce point of view, is not very good. And everybody keeps saying, well, you must use online banking. Not everybody's got a computer, and not everybody wants to use online banking. It's as simple as that. Everything else, apart from in Home Firth, we've got Home Firth has always been a little bit of a bottleneck because it's the only way over the tops into Manchester or into Derbyshire. You've got to go through Home Firth, and it is one of these sort of through towns. And when it gets busy, the traffic lights at the top of Victoria Street are worse than useless because they hold up all the traffic. They let about 2 cars through from the direction of New Mill and 22 through coming from the direction of Manchester. So you get a backup of traffic some nights right up Town Gate and halfway up Station Road. This causes a hell of a mess. And I can tell you that thinking back to when I first joined the council, which was about I can't remember now, but it was quite a while ago. But I've worked in Home Firth as an apprentice of 16 up to retiring. I've worked in Home Firth, so I've watched Home Firth and I've watched the traffic. And I can tell you now, and this goes to Councillor McBride, I hope he's listening to me. We had some traffic lights fitted, Peter, in Home Firth way back in I think it was 19 1987, we didn't want them because we had 2 zebra crossings at the top of the street, only one of those crossings where first come, first served, and we never had any accidents. But we're told by Kirklees at that time, you've got to have these traffic lights. Well, I've got to tell you, ever since those traffic lights were fitted, we've had great problems. We've had the traffic light man up from Kirklees so many times, I did suggest he either got a house in Firth or they put a tent up, because he spent so much time trying to sort the traffic lights out, and I got to tell you, we still haven't succeeded. And if this goes ahead, what they're wanting to do, that's keep the loading and unloading to one side of the street, then I'm sorry, Nigel's quite right, and I hate to be negative on things like this. We will lose businesses, we will lose trade, and I don't intend to sit around and watch Firth die on its feet. Remember, I worked there for 50 years, and I have to tell you, it was a fantastic little place. And over the years, we've got so many empty buildings. I would like Peter just to note this. We've got the old council building, which is empty and has been for 4 years. We've got the offices that we use for elections office, and there was at one time. That's empty. And the information shop, which was the old YB showroom, which was one of the most useful shops. Okay,
Can you start winding up, Councillor Firth, if that's okay? Thank you.
That's closed. And that does not help Firth at all. I don't know what people think when they come into village and see everything half closed. I will shut up now. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Firth. So, Councillor, I can see you've asked to speak, but what, as we said earlier, what I was going to do was take these 2 items and then read the submissions from the public, and then we were going to move on to the presentations.
Well, I think it's if I could, Chair, it's just relevant to this, that
to the Home Firth.
To the Home Firth. I mean,
okay,
firstly,
please be mindful of time.
I will, and for, in respect of that, I think possibly somebody's misadvised you, because councillors speaking at a committee or panel such as this have got the same speaking rights as any member. According to CPR 36, the 5 minutes is purely for a planning committee. But,
no, sorry, Councillor Bartlett. I did check this before, and they said I had discretion as chair, so that's why I said.
You have discretion, but
so,
as I said,
and to be fair, I didn't really cut anybody off. But go ahead, Councillor Bartlett.
Can I just say that as a member of this panel, one thing I was going to say anyway about this item is I'm very disappointed that for an update report on technical aspects like this, we're trying to follow what colleagues have said here, and we don't even have a plan in front of us. I know Home Firth. I'm a regular visitor there and a patron of the Corner House Cafe for my bacon sandwiches on a Saturday. And I'm trying to guess what's happening, but without a plan so that we can see. I know there are pedestrian crossings on that road. I can't understand where the things are affecting. I can and bring some professional expertise here, because probably the only one on the meeting today who's had an HGV license for 47 years. So I've therefore got some experience of doing multi-drop deliveries like we're talking about here. And I can fully understand what my colleagues are saying, that as a driver, if you're told to park at one side of the road and then frequently cross a road carrying things, I'd like to see a health and safety assessment. I'd also like, without disparaging anybody in Home Firth, I'd like to see a security assessment, because for a driver to leave his vehicle open and be walking backwards and forwards like that, I'd like to know what the unions think, because in my day, the Transport and General Workers Union, of which I was a member and involved in my haulage company, I think they would have something to say about their members doing that. So it is, I think we're lacking in detail with this, and I hope that the staff will take that on board. And that's a matter, again, just what you're saying there, Chair, of time efficiency. If the report had have had the detail of the schemes, maps, we're talking about updates, so what's changed, what are the backgrounds, we could have probably saved a lot of the officer time in doing that, and members of the public and others could have done that research. As it is now, we're starting from point zero. We'll be expecting the staff to give us a full update, and then we may have comments on that. One final comment on this matter at the moment as well, and I would remind colleagues and anybody else that this has been around for a while, and in June, was it? Yes, there we are. August 2019, Councillor McBride on this scheme said that when he was pulling it, delivering a scheme that people don't want is in no one's interest. So we're going to look at it and propose something different. And it would seem here that not only is it a scheme which, again, people don't want, but one which there are so far, as we are aware, unresolved health and safety issues. And certainly I, for one, will want that resolving before it went anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. Okay, I'm going to read the submissions that we received from members of the public. This will be a summary of the submissions and questions that we received. Okay, so all submissions and questions have been shared in full with panel members and the officers in advance of the meeting. Here's a summary of the issues and questions that were raised. 3 questions from Richard Stowe in respect of confirmation that the full updated WICA, so West Yorkshire Combined Authority Assurance Framework, carbon impact assessment will be applied to all current road schemes at all phases, including retrospective phase assessments. Whether the transport team will accept written evidence and scope incorporation into design amendments of evidence against the A629 Huddersfield to Ainley Top scheme prior to any further decisions or engage in ongoing discussion about scheme design detail, especially tree conservation. Also, publicity of the outcome of the carbon impact assessment and further public consultation. Submission from Kirklees cycling campaign. They're pleased to see that cycling and walking is now treated as transport and therefore much better integrated into overall transport planning. There is a need to develop more effective structures for the planning and integration of active travel in Kirklees. That the development of active travel in Kirklees would also be more effective if there was a local stakeholder involvement structurally embedded into planning, delivery and assessment of cycling and walking projects, and this should be more evident. Questions from Sarah Newton concerning the A629 scheme. So we took a couple of public questions from her previously, but she sent quite a lot of information. So we said we would summarise the rest of the information that she sent. So here it is. Will Kirklees carry out an independent carbon audit of the A629 scheme? And if not, why not? The criteria used to assess carbon impacts and whether independent consultants will be used. So she's asking about that as well. And she's also asked whether the outcome of assessments will be made public. She's also asking whether the A629 Phase 5 scheme has passed the assurance process. The cutting down of mature trees along the A629 and the impact of the environment, she has a question around that. And also, is the Phase 5 scheme still necessary in light of demand? And I guess she's talking about sort of the car usage at the moment. Submission from H. Longbottom. He has requested that members watch a video called Save Edgerton Road Trees in Huddersfield to illustrate the concerns of residents and local organisations in relation to increased levels of traffic and pollution associated with A629 Halifax Road Phase 5 scheme. And all panel members and officers received that YouTube video link. Submission from Huddersfield Civic Society. In respect of the status of the various schemes, there are no RAG, which is red, amber, green indicators to differentiate between schemes not yet ready to proceed, schemes ready to proceed, and schemes already approved and underway. They're also asking which transport schemes are ready to begin on site in financial year 2021-22. What are the capacity and capability constraints, i.e. not money, within the council to ensure that the schemes are ready to proceed in the relevant financial year and to ensure that early stage scheme design is informed by stakeholder engagement? Huddersfield Civic Society have reservations about several aspects of the Phase 5 A629 scheme, including concern that journey times are unlikely to be improved and adverse impacts and have adverse impact on Egerton Conservation Area. They've also asked about the importance of community engagement in respect of active travel. And the final submission from Friends of the Earth Huddersfield. In relation to the induced traffic effect, the felling of 126 mature trees associated with the A629 scheme and the application of WICA West Yorkshire Combined Authority's new carbon impact assessment methodology to road projects. So they're asking about the induced traffic effect in relation to the felling of those trees. They've also got questions about what stage the A629 scheme is at and the timescale for the scheme being assessed using the WICA carbon impact assessment methodology, and whether Kirklees transportation team is also using independent consultants to measure the carbon impact of A629 and whether outcomes will be made public. Okay, so that's the summary of those, and officers have had that in advance as well. So I'm going to move on to Richard Hollison, who's going to do a presentation. There'll be plenty of time, members, for you to speak. I know some haven't spoken yet, but there will be plenty of time. Don't worry. Okay. So I'm going to pass over to Richard Hollison. Okay, Richard.
Sorry, Chair, could I ask, can we deal with this one scheme in Home Firth that we've got members here for? I mean, yeah, I'm sure they will be interested in wider schemes, but it does lose a bit of track if the points that they've raised, and obviously the technical points that I've raised, they need dealing with at the same time as it was, dealing with it down the line after an officer presentation with respect.
No, they're going to be covered in the presentation, Martin. Okay, so give them a chance. So let them do that, and then we can certainly follow up if it's required after. Okay, so Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone.
Sorry, Richard, I should say we would like you to obviously cover the points that we've just gone through, if you can as well, please. Okay.
Okay, I'll do my best. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking this item this afternoon. If I can just introduce myself and some colleagues I've got with me, just introduce who they are, what their roles are. That'll help when we get to questions and answers and how I sort of field them. So my name is Richard Hollinson. I'm the head of the Major Project Service section. I've got with me this afternoon my colleague Keith Bloomfield, who's our lead on most of the West Yorkshire Transport Fund schemes. I've got Andrew Higson, who's our Transforming Cities Fund programme lead, and Tim Lawrence, who's our Transport Strategy and Policy group lead as well, who's partly responsible for the active travel schemes as well. Okay. Chair, I was going to, I haven't got a presentation as such. I was going to sort of take members of the panel through the main parts of the report that's been prepared, signpost people to sort of relevant sections, if that's helpful. And then I will try and pick up as many of those sort of issues and themes that have been raised in the submissions as possible. And then perhaps we can come back to points of detail if there are some left. Okay, so turning to the report itself, what we were asked to do for this scrutiny was provide an update on the overall aims and objectives of our major transport schemes, talk about the different transportation programmes and the funding sources that we have, touch on the processes we go through to develop schemes and draw down funding, provide a position statement on each transportation project, and that section is set out in the appendices of the report. What we haven't been asked to include is information on wider transportation initiatives that are going on in Kirklees. There are quite a few. Not being dealt with directly by our service. Just to mention a few, things like the Transpennine route upgrade, which is a major investment in rail by Network Rail, and information on highway schemes and projects contained in the Council's Highways Capital Plan. For information, the Council's Major Project Service doesn't sit in the Highway Authority, it sits in the Growth and Regeneration Directorate. But of course, we work closely with our highway colleagues. It's probably worth mentioning as well that the council doesn't run bus and train services, but as I'll come to and touch on in terms of signposting to the report, we do try to play a key role in supporting those functions. So just turning to sort of our overall aims and objectives in terms of the current transportation programme. We are working on a significant number of plans, programmes and projects, as you can see from the report. The objectives we have concern active travel, public transport investment, supporting planned growth in the local plan, and you will see a very close correlation between the local plan and the major transportation projects. Planning for economic growth and recovery, improving air quality and reducing congestion. We're currently dealing with a capital programme of around £200 million, which is obviously a significant investment in transportation. For our part, there's a clear economic rationale for the schemes. We are aiming to help accommodate future growth in housing and jobs as set out in the local plan. There is a strong alignment with the local plan. Majority of the transport schemes are actually identified in the local plan as transport proposals and were considered as part of the local plan examination in public, as well as being subject to their own processes through this programme. And we are, wherever possible, trying to create jobs in construction, supply chains and social value outcomes as part of bringing forward these schemes, which are all subject to value for money testing, as I'll come on to shortly. I also think it's worth recognising that in developing schemes, we have to take on board the various key strategies the council has, such as our economic plans and objectives, our health and wellbeing plans and objectives, as well as our environmental plans and objectives, and obviously the local plan as a major land use strategy. I think I'll skip on slightly to stress some parts of sort of how schemes are developed, Chair, if I may. For its part, officers continue to develop several complex, multifaceted transport schemes, which at their core include public transport, cycling and walking initiatives. At the heart of scheme development is a multidisciplinary approach. So whilst we have a central team in the major project service, we actually work right across the council with many different service areas in different disciplines. I've listed some of them in the report, but there are many and varied, including highway design, road safety, urban traffic control, highway construction, planning teams, town centre regeneration teams, our legal and procurement, asset and finance teams, our communication, drainage, environmental health and public health teams, and there are more. I just wanted to say something about, I think it's important for us that this debate focuses not just on the schemes that we presented as part of this update, but also that we see transportation through a wider lens when we're considering the schemes that are presented here today. We are working on placemaking projects in and around our major transport hubs, in town centres particularly. Reference the Better Connected Stations projects. The one in Huddersfield is currently underway at the moment. And we're also supporting rail and bus investment plans in Kirklees, working with the Combined Authority, who have the greater responsibility, particularly for bus. We're working closely with them on rail. I think that's a good point to signpost a Combined Authority piece of work that's currently available, which is called the West Yorkshire Combined Authority Connectivity Strategy. That's a draft document that's available for consultation at the moment, and it's a plan that will really set the transportation vision and approach that we will take in West Yorkshire and in Kirklees for probably the next 20 years. So I would encourage people to have the say on that document, and it will certainly be a key plank of part of our plans as we move forward as well. I'll come on to the climate emergency under the specific section of the report, because obviously we've completed that section report about how we're going to approach things in the regard of that. I'll just touch on briefly some of the main programmes that we presented in the report. We've got the West Yorkshire Transport Fund, we've got the Transforming Cities Fund, and we've referenced the Active Travel Fund today. I think what I wanted to say was the main point that we were trying to present is that as part of our transport investments, we're trying to address the spectrum of transportation and not just road, which obviously tends to get the focus. But the Transforming Cities Fund programme is completely focused on public transport, walking and cycling, and changes to road space. And obviously you've heard on the Active Travel programme previously. We've given you an update on Active Travel with regards to the Active Travel Fund. We didn't repeat the information that we brought to Scrutiny only a couple of months ago. You did have a major item on Active Travel in December, where we presented fully on Active Travel then. And we just asked that our work in this report is read in conjunction with that previous report with regards to Active Travel, and it's seen as a holistic approach to is what we're trying to achieve. The assurance framework, I'll mention it in the report because it's such a vital part of the processes we go through. And I think for Scrutiny, it's useful to be reassured, hopefully, that schemes are developed in partnership with the combined authority through a very rigorous assurance framework. It does take time to get through that framework, and I've included information in the appendices of the report that show all the different steps of that process, and we'll happily take questions on that, but it is very detailed. I think the main thing for us is that we want to try and confirm to you that we work very much in partnership with the combined authority. They act as our funder for the large part, and also as a checker. We have to pass these gateways, and these gateways are very rigorous. The business cases we submit as part of this process are often very significant documents that fully take on board the government's what they call the Green Book, which is a process for assessing schemes. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. It asks you to confirm the strategic case, i.e., is it rational? Is it justified? At the economic case, in terms of what's the value of doing it, the commercial case, in terms of whether it's realistic, and the financial case, in terms of the impact on the public sector budget. And finally, a management case, can you deliver it with good governance? I guess the point here is that there are significant checks on our processes, and these tests are applied very robustly. In terms of one of the points that one of the submissions has made around sort of capacity, I think we do need to recognise these schemes are very significant in terms of scale and size. They do take a long time to progress and go through the very complicated processes that we need to go through. It isn't just highway engineering, which it's often referred to, and highway design. There are other complex legislative and statutory processes, including planning, land assembly, land acquisition, potentially compulsory purchase orders, traffic regulation orders, and others. And so we adopt a multidisciplinary approach to trying to bring forward these projects. Under climate change and air quality, I think if I just start with air quality, I think air quality is a key objective of all of the schemes, particularly the West Yorkshire Transport Fund schemes. And I mean by that improving air quality and having a positive impact on the environment wherever possible. We do take that particularly seriously. We have poor air quality in the district, as many of you on the panel will already know. And there is a strong correlation between air quality management areas and the schemes that we're developing, which ties in with the Council's Air Quality Action Plan. In terms of the climate emergency, which has been declared obviously by Kirklees and by the combined authority, we are working within the assurance framework that I mentioned, and that assurance framework is now being developed by the combined authority. They've published a carbon emissions reduction pathway, which is a sort of higher level look at how policies and strategies can aim to decarbonise all sectors of the economy in West Yorkshire, but including power, construction, industry, but also transportation. And transportation is really a very key part of it. But on a project level, they're also now developing a toolkit around carbon impact assessment, and this touches on, I think, a number of the submissions made as part of the questions you've received. I've double checked the process with the Combined Authority because reports have been going through the Combined Authority governance process just in the last sort of month or so. And the information I have is that the Combined Authority will be carrying out a review of all the schemes that are currently in their funding programme for transportation. I think they're looking at about 120 schemes altogether, not obviously just in Kirklees. And they'll be carrying out that process, and they will be reporting back on that process through the routes that we have through the assurance framework. So that's how it's going to be taken into account. That's very helpful. Depends on the extent to which schemes can react to that will depend on the stage they've reached. So obviously schemes that are at the end of the assurance framework and they're already in delivery, I think that will help the Combined Authority understand the sort of baseline position in terms of carbon impact. For schemes that are earlier in the process, perhaps at the outline business case stage, which is an earlier part in the process, there'll be more opportunity for schemes to develop and modify to take into account carbon impact. Notwithstanding that, we have committed to carrying out carbon impact assessment ourselves for certain schemes already, particularly those that are going to need planning permission. And you had questions about the A629 scheme. We have carried out a carbon impact assessment for that scheme. And as I said earlier, we are going to be submitting a full planning application for that scheme. The carbon impact assessment will be included in that planning application, and it will be made publicly available for everybody to comment on and take into account as part of that process. Final point from me, because it just touched on one of the other comments that was made, Chair, in terms of capacity, and then perhaps I can turn to just a few of the other comments that are made in general terms. In terms of capacity, I mean, these schemes are really quite significant. It is a challenge. We do have a highly skilled core transportation group that's based in the Major Project Service that we have been increasing resources into. As I've said a number of times when I've been speaking, this is a multidisciplinary process and requires input from across the service, across services across the council. Also, it needs to take into account comments made through public consultation and engagement. And also we need to work with a number of different partners and statutory bodies. And they all have their own limitations in terms of capacity. And COVID has definitely played an impact on people's capacity and time. And also at the delivery stage, the construction industry is recovering as well, although some of it has kept going rather well. And so we're doing our best to look at ways of procuring things effectively and maximising the benefits for residents and businesses and apprenticeships and skills through those routes. Okay. Chair, if that's okay, that was my sort of signposting to the report and talking to it. I know you listed a significant number of questions. I touched on some of those, I think, in my answers there, but perhaps not everything. In terms of the approach to active travel, comments made, I think, by the cycling community, we'd like to thank them for those comments. I think we laid out our approach to involving stakeholders in that process in the scrutiny report we brought in December. And we'd like to, go ahead with that approach, and we're very keen to talk to that organisation and others in developing our active travel programme. We're happy to take detailed questions about the A629 Halifax Road scheme as part of the next Q&A. Obviously, a number of the questions that you received do relate to that specific scheme, so perhaps I could leave those to those. In terms of your question about whether schemes are ready to proceed, in the summary section, we've included the decision point stage that each scheme's nearing. So that's outline business case or full business case. And in simple terms, if it's nearing the full business case or full business case plus costs, which is the very final part of that assurance framework, then it's closer to being delivered. And we've also tried to include estimated start on site dates in the project summaries as well. And And then finally for me, I think there were questions about how we will work with residents and businesses, how we can take comments on board. We're very committed to that. The assurance process with the combined authority requires public consultation and engagement at each stage of the process. We work with the combined authority to do those processes. We use their consultation and communications teams to help us do it. And we analyse the comments that come in and take them into account for each stage of the process. And obviously, where schemes do require planning permission, there's another major chance for people to have their say through that process as well. I think that might partly answer some of the questions you've had about the A629 scheme, where obviously if I would encourage people to respond to the planning application process, because that's going to be in soon. And as part of that, obviously people are free to make any objections they feel free to make. But there's also an opportunity there to put forward suggestions of how perhaps the scheme could be improved. And that's a useful process for us. We can look at that and we can see what can be done as part of moving towards the final stages of that scheme, obviously subject to planning permission. So thank you very much for allowing me to present on that. Hopefully I've touched on most of the points that were raised. There was many questions there, Councillor Upall, so I hope I've done my best to pick up as many as I can. I'm sure there'll be many more questions to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. And we can I'll have a look through again just to see if there's any additional points that we might want to flag as well. Have we lost Rich? Oh no, he's still here. Richard, I just wanted to just mention the Home Firth Access Plan again. You mentioned that you want to sort of engage with businesses. Sorry, I got my pen stuck in my hair there. Sorry about that. But there's some specific issues mentioned about loading issues on one side for businesses, what health and safety assessment and what security assessments, what part will they play in this process? I don't know if you or one of your colleagues want to touch on that.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback. If I can bring in my colleague Keith Bloomfield, who will take you through most of the detail of that, and then perhaps Councillor McBride might add something on to the end of that. But I'll bring Keith in if that's okay, Chair.
Can everybody see that plan?
Yes, we can, Keith.
Okay, I am a man with a plan. Okay. So, thank you, councillors, for all your responses back on Home Firth. As I'm sure you're aware, but I'll reiterate for the panel, we've consulted on this project twice to the general public, in March 2019 and in September 2019. And then we also consulted the Business Forum separately late 2019, early 2020. The outcome of the last consultation with the Business Forum is the plan that you can see. And this is the last plan that councillors saw in relation to Home Firth. So the loading bay on Victoria Street on this plan is shown on the south side. That is the side where councillors Firth and Patrick have said that most of the Business Forum, the baker, the newsagents on the corner are located. So in actual fact, it's the loading bay is located in respect of their businesses. Councillor Bolt mentioned, have you analysed it from a health and safety point of view? And yes, we have. Now, the amount of people wanting to service from the south side of Victoria Street outnumbers the amount of businesses that want to service from the north side. However, in health and safety terms, one could argue on the north side, when that side has got to service the Magic Rock Brewery, the Picturedrome and the Bridge Hotel, the type of deliveries they're receiving could be argued that from an health and safety point of view, the loading bay should be on the north side. So we do have a bit of a dilemma. If you want to improve, or if we want to improve Victoria Street for the good of not just the car-borne traffic, but the pedestrian and the successful economy that may go with access, with increased pedestrian usage and making the place better, we can only have a lay-by either on the south side or the north side. If we had a lay-by on both sides, we wouldn't be able to fit the traffic in the middle. At this moment in time, Victoria Street does have a loading bay on the north side of Victoria Street. It is enough for 4 vehicles. The street has single yellow lines, double yellow lines, and double yellow lines with blips, which means that there's no, typically, if you want to load and unload, there's actually no restrictions on Victoria Street at present. Anybody can park there and unload and load, providing that's what you're doing on the single yellow line, double yellow line. You can only not unload on the blip, the double yellow line with blips, and that's around the corner, and that's around the south side corner at the top of Victoria Street where the Yorkshire Building Society is. However, that's abused as well. So at this moment in time, we've got a blocked street. We've got as Councillor Firth did say, it's a heavily trafficked street, but it's blocked. It's blocked by parked vehicles parking unfettered along Victoria Street. We've got narrow footways along Victoria Street where pedestrians, people with prams, etc., most of the time are confronted by vehicles parked on the footway, nipping in for something from the bakery, nipping into the newsagents. We can't have that situation. This scheme is not just about an improvement to Victoria Street, and neither is it an improvement just to traffic and making travel time benefits. It's actually a £4 million scheme that sits in the transport budgets. So we do need to demonstrate a travel time benefit. However, we also can, on the back of that, serve to actually reimagine and start to regenerate Home Firth by bringing in a space where the car park, which is to the left of Victoria Street, can be used as an event space in lieu of a car park. So it can be a pop-up event space. It could be a market of the future and a market area where at this moment in time, Home Firth doesn't have a sort of a town square or something that those activities could play out. It has occasional events that are featured on Hollowgate, the Folk Festival, the Food and Drink Festival. Well, if you've then got this event space in lieu of the car park to the left of Victoria Street, you could use that as the event space. We've also got some cycling and walking features on Hollowgate to connect up to the A6024, and that's the brown route going through the car park. So we're increasing connectivity. We're increasing footway widths where we can, not just on Victoria Street, and we're providing a better travel time benefit by declogging Victoria Street so traffic can move through that area and actually get to their destination, where at this moment in time they're confronted by parked vehicles. So to cut a long story short, in terms of the loading and unloading, we can only have the loading bay on one side of the street. We at this present, as of January 20, we've shown it on the south side. It could equally be on the north side, but then there's a dilemma for the north side because the business forum, who actually persuaded us to actually put it on the south side because of their input into the scheme design, that didn't include the Magic Rock, the Pitcherdrome, or the Bridge Hotel. So that didn't do at the time, but they've made recently they've made representation to say they want the lay-by on that side. So we're in a bit of a dilemma. What we can do, and what I am doing, is trying to seek a solution, not with a lay-by on both sides, but would seek to appease both the north side businesses and the south side businesses. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Keith. That was very helpful. I'm going to move on now to the other panel members. So there might be some follow-up questions, Keith. But if we leave it for now, are you okay to take the document down? Thank you very much, Keith. Appreciate that. So we've got Councillor Bolt and then Councillor Eastwood. And we've got Councillor Patrick who would like to speak again. I'm okay with that as long as other members are. I just want to make sure panel members are okay. That's fine. I also just want to mention one of our co-optees, Andrew Bird, has finally got through his technical difficulty, and he's also joined us on the meeting. And I know you've got a question as well, Andrew, and I've got Councillor Taylor as well. Okay, so I'm going to start from with Councillor Bolt.
Thanks, Chair. And yeah, pleased to see that diagram. Nobody's talking about carbon shoppers and affecting trade. The issue that's being said here was about deliveries. And again, there was some talk about moving it one side to the other, and obviously with two sides of the road and businesses on both, you have to find some way to satisfy them, because as the officer said, yeah, you've got Magic Rock Brewery on one side, so you're not going to cart kegs of beer across the road, are you? You've got a problem then. And similar that on the other side, you've got the bakers. But a business from Murfield has moved out there, and I've just looked. She was diversifying a business. Jo Richards has worked hard to build up a business. She was operating a travel agent, Tivoli Travel, on there. But now she's diversifying, or she had it recently publicised she was diversifying in the Huddersfield hub, that she was going to open a florist and gift shop. Now, again, those are things which we've seen the size of the Pantechnicons for the florist deliveries. And again, I refer to my experience doing that. Yeah, you need to be able to get out and across. I like officers to know how we're going to sustain the businesses to which the customers are going to come. Now, whether that's by having time limited, I don't know, in the centre of Huddersfield, New Street, you have time limited deliveries. We need to have some consultation, because it's been said during the presentation that comments can be made during the planning process. Well, it's too late then by the time you get to the planning, because the highways officers have often submitted their reports, and there's very little opportunity. It's a very stunted process. We see things, because issues that have already been referred to as well on other schemes. There's no reference or consideration in the planning process for the council's tree policy. The council have said it's going to protect trees, and that's been referred to on presentations. But talking to officers in planning, the cabinet tree policy is not a planning document, so has no impact on that. So it's hypothesis. Similarly, the council's climate emergency motion is not accepted as a planning policy. Mention was made about one of my go-to documents that just happens to sit by my desk lots of times, and that's the carbon reduction pathways. All schemes should now include reference to achieving that, because the transport issues are mentioned in that, and I've had confirmation both at director level and at cabinet member level that Kirklees are adopting the West Yorkshire carbon emission reduction targets. So for members of the panel and members of the public, that means on highway schemes, you need to be looking at reducing private car travel by 21%, increasing travel by walking by 78%, increasing travel by bike by 2,000%, and bus and rail will be difficult, obviously, because we've seen things. So they need to be factored in. I haven't seen anything in the update that says that these schemes are having reference to local transport note 120 and cycle proofing, without which you risk losing funding. We've cut across a lot of schemes, and as I say, I was hoping the update would be what it says on the tin, that let's see what's different to when we first saw it. I haven't seen the update on Cooper Bridge. There's been much public divergence between what the staff said, that the staff are progressing schemes A, B and C, which were consulted on nearly 3 years ago, and Councillor McBride said publicly that he had told them to stop work on those schemes because they adversely impacted the woodland. We haven't heard any update on that, about where's that, what's the alignment, what's being considered. We see in the report that there are 2 schemes in that area. There's the £70 million Cooper Bridge gyratory, but surely for good management, you then cross-reference that with a £2.4 million Bradley to Brighouse cycle scheme, which is going along the same axis. And again, by way of update, Chair, on page 30, we have a plan of the Bradley to Brighouse cycle scheme. And under the parlance that we're talking about now, it should be the Bradley to Brighouse active travel scheme. That is not the plan that the public were consulted on. So an update would say, what's changed? On that, if we're talking about updates, there's a great danger on page 30 of getting anybody across the A62 at Combridge there. So updates, the issue about reference to Wyker, I can tell you as a member of the Wyker Transport Committee, when I raise issues about schemes such as this, such as the Milnes Bridge towpath scheme, I'm told to go speak to Kirklees. We've heard here, oh, it's all been done at Wyker. So there's a bat and ball approach. You know, we need to know accountability, and I would say the accountability is with Kirklees. Again, accountability, reference and strategy. If you look at page 35, Chair, a £500,000 scheme. Spen Valley links to the A638. Well, it has done for probably about 100 years. A £500,000 scheme talking about improving walking and cycle access to the Spen Valley Greenway. As one of the designers and proponents of that scheme, I think we've had good links. What I'm concerned about now, though, is the danger to the highly successful Spen Valley Greenway and how it then impacts on your carbon emission reduction, because there's nothing in here that talks about the aspirations for a mass rapid transit scheme along that same axis, along that same route. You're running trams next to walkers, cyclists and horse rides. Again, how's that working? Things that are missing. I've seen consultation just this last day or so, Chair, about a scheme that affects your ward, the Huddersfield, Ashbrow, Fixby, Brighouse corridor. What's that? The A641, is it, or something? Forgive me for the road names. Again, we should be seeing that. That's a major scheme that Wyker have launched for consultation, but we as a scrutiny committee are not given the opportunity to scrutinise schemes. I said I was disappointed by the lack of material before us. I'm further disappointed that we're not getting the update. We've got no clarity on how these schemes have evolved. Have they taken any cognizance of what the public have said before? Because again, we're talking about consultation. The Home First scheme and active travel. Yes, the Kirklees Cycle Group may want to comment, but I was there when Home Firth started a new cycling club probably about 6 or 7 years ago, and I think it's got about 400 members, Chair. You would think that one of the first places to start would be in your locality. So we're going to change these schemes. I've seen nothing here. So I'm very disappointed about how light this report is. As a scrutiny committee, it's not giving us the opportunity to make any in-depth comment. We should be here to steer Cabinet, to provide input and help them to give direction. And all I'm seeing on here is a lot of high-level information with no current detail on it about how things have changed. Dewsbury Station access, Calder Valley Greenway link, £300,000. To me, that looks like just going on 2 roads that are already there. So I'm very disappointed, Chair, today.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Councillor Ball. I don't know who wants to take that, Councillor McBride or Richard or Keith. Who wants to take those comments?
Perhaps I can start, Chair.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I do apologise, I'm getting some feedback and I can't really hear myself properly. I don't know if the mics are on.
Can everyone turn their mics off, please?
Thank you, Chair. That is better, thank you. I've tried to write most of those down. Comments, I think Councillor Bolt raised the issue that I mentioned. Comments can be made at the planning application stage, which is obviously correct. But I think I also referenced in the report the fact we work with the combined authority to engage and consult on schemes in their development as well. So there are, at each major milestone of development of the scheme, big opportunity for people to make their comments known about schemes. And all the schemes we're developing have been subject or are subject to that process.
Sorry, Chair, must correct the officer. Even Kirklees councillors who are not members of the WICA committees, Transport Committee Investment, are not allowed to speak. How can you comment, influence and direct as a representative when you're not? We've had Liz Smage turned up because there was a WICA scheme that Bradford were promoting that had about 5 miles of it in Birkenshaw, and she wasn't allowed to speak at WICA. So to say that people can make representation there is not correct, Chair. Sorry.
Chair, if I may come back on that. Sorry, I'm getting feedback again. Sorry. Is that the point I was making is that the consultation I'm referring to is public consultation, and not simply making representations at a panel meeting or a committee meeting or an assurance framework meeting at the combined authority. So those public consultations are open to everyone to make a comment. By way of clarification, I hope that helps. In terms of I think the reference was made to the carbon reduction emissions pathway and reference being made to those for schemes. I think officers welcome that comment. We're absolutely correct. And I think I confirmed that we're working with the combined authority to do that. The targets being referenced in that pathway are holistic targets. They're targets for the whole of West Yorkshire to achieve. And so care needs to be taken about their application to an individual scheme. But in terms of the whole approach to transportation, and not just transportation, linked to that land use planning and other matters, absolutely valid points, and officers would agree with that. And we are trying to achieve that in scheme development. A reference was made to LTN 120. That for members of the public and the panel is a design document that the government have produced to set standards for walking and cycling schemes, particularly cycling. Schemes are now being looked at to see if they can adhere to that policy, that guidance note, which the Department of Transport produce as far as possible. It is very helpful if they can, because obviously it really helps bring forward walking and cycling schemes at a higher standard. And the combined authority are looking at ways in which they can achieve that through assessing schemes when we submit schemes through the assurance framework that I mentioned. So we're certainly closely looking at that. Just to save my voice slightly, and someone who will have a bit more detail to answer the Council Vault's questions, I think if I could just bring Keith back in with regards to the Cooper Bridge scheme and the Bradley to Brighouse scheme first, and then perhaps Keith again in terms of the first comment that was made about I think the businesses needs again in Home Firth, and then I'll come back in to cover the A641 question and how schemes evolve, if that's okay, Chair.
That's fine, thank you.
Keith?
Yeah, okay. In terms of Cooper Bridge, I think Councillor Bolt asked the question, whereabouts are we with that, developing that scheme? A link road option is still on the table. However, we can state that none of the ancient woodland along Wakefield Road will be affected by that. So given that, we've been looking at other options for Cooper Bridge. To add to the one link road option that we've got, that doesn't affect the ancient woodland. The few options we've been looking at are all online options. And what I mean by that is on the existing highway. So everything from Bradley out to Cooper Bridge is what we're looking at now in terms of developing a scheme. We are very close to devising a preferred option based on an online solution. We're not there yet. We are planning to come out to consultation sometime around May, June this year, when we'll consult with the general public on our preferred option. The second question was, does it take credence on the Bradley to Brighouse cycle scheme? When the councillors see those plans, in terms of our preferred option that's emerging for Cooper Bridge, it does include a link from the locality of Oak Road, namely around Quarry Road. It links to Bradley to Brighouse. So in strategic and narrative terms, it forms part of the same package. So what we're developing around Oak Road and around the locality of the A62, Oak Road, Bradley Road, we're developing network infrastructure to encourage cyclists to use the highway until they get to the Bradley to Brighouse, and then using Quarry Road to deliver cyclists off-road all the way into Brighouse. And we're also working in partnership with Calderdale colleagues to make sure that the cycling infrastructure on the Calderdale side also dovetails into their 641 aspirations and their scheme on the other side. So yes, we do talk about an empirical scheme where they are interlinked. They are not. They are two separate schemes in terms of funding, but they are actually jigsawed together to form one cycling scheme, which starts around the Oak Road area and delivers cyclists in a safe manner off-road, albeit off-road, to Brighouse. Going on to the second question, which I forgot about. Can somebody prompt me again on the second question? I do apologise.
No, that's okay, Keith. I've forgotten as well.
Okay, I think I can remember, Chair. It was Councillor Bolt's first question, which was about the needs of shoppers and the fact there's I think diversifying the diversification of businesses on Victoria Street in Home Firth. If I've got that right, Councillor Bolt.
That was one of them. The other, so whether it was the second question, but the conflict between the £500,000 on the Spen Valley Greenway and the Mass Rapid Transit scheme on the same alignment, in fact the same land.
Yeah. So Keith, if you can take the Home Firth one, and then Tim Lawrence can come in on the Spen Valley one.
Yeah, I think Councillor Bolt's question actually highlights the issue on Victoria Street, because he talked about carbon traffic and carbon traffic to Home Firth, and the need of providing space for cars to park while shopping in Home Firth. The Home Firth scheme doesn't have a net reduction on car parking. It's just located in a slightly different way. Still slightly different location. So yes, we do have to take into consideration people coming in by car, but Councillor Bolt, being a cyclist, is also keen to push the agenda for cyclists, and we are providing cycling facilities within Home Firth. We will look again to whether they totally adhere to LTN 120, and we will look again. We are looking at putting electric bike charging in Home Firth, which is quite unique, electric charging points for vehicles. So we are trying to encourage the sustainable mode. And as I've articulated before, we're also trying to do with Victoria Street, we're trying to provide a better environment for the pedestrian. And sometimes when you're trying to do all those three, help cyclists, help pedestrians, and help people in cars, and you can add then public transport into it, something has to give. Something has to give. And if the chair would allow me to show a Google snapshot of what Victoria Street looks like the last time Mr. Google looked at it, it might help this sort of debate.
Yeah, please go ahead, Keith.
Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. So that is Victoria Street. Now the white van man, maybe a white van woman, don't know, on the right hand side of Victoria Street is parked on double yellow lines. Whether they're unloading or unloading, I haven't got a clue. And also the vehicle which carries the white van on the left hand side, which is the glass carrying van, is also parked. So Victoria Street at this time only has room for one stream of vehicles, whether it's up Victoria Street or down Victoria Street. I think this sort of says, that Victoria, is it working now? Is the street working for everyone? I think this Google snapshot image says, I don't think it is. Is it helping the carbon traffic? Not too sure. Is it help pedestrians? Well, some of the vehicles are parked on the footway, narrowing the narrow footways even further down. I am not too sure. You know, who is it helping at this moment in time? How is it functioning? I think that's the debate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
In terms of the Spen Valley,
yep.
Does anybody else want to pick that up, Tim? Or?
I think Tim's going to come in on the A641 and the Spen Valley question, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, Chair. Maybe I'll pick up the Spen Valley issue first of all, with the West Yorkshire connectivity. Perhaps I could share my screen to elucidate a little more clearly what Councillor Bolt is talking about. So this document here is the West Yorkshire Mass Transit Vision, and as my colleague Richard spoke earlier in his presentation, this is a document that's currently out for consultation as part of a suite of documents under the West Yorkshire Connectivity Infrastructure Plan. So I would urge anybody on the panel to have a look at this and perhaps get in contact with the Combined Authority to respond to it, to air your views and to make sure your voice is heard. If we scroll through the document just to highlight some pertinent points, it may be that what Councillor Bolt is referring to is this engagement plan, which has opportunity for mass transit on these London Underground style maps. And as you can see, or as the panel can see, there is a line connecting Dewsbury to Bradford. Now, this is a public document. It is available for anybody to have a look at, so I'm not showing you anything that you can't publicly access. I can put the link in the chat box as well. Now, as we move down, these corridors are discussed in a bit more detail, and this is the point, I think, of the consultation, just to hammer that point home a little bit, that these are corridors and it is a consultation. And as with all these type of things, there are a number of issues that need to be raised and need to be dealt with. And I think Councillor Bolt is quite right to highlight that potential issue. And Kirklees Council, whilst not responding formally, will be working very closely with the Combined Authority as part of a phase 2 development of this after the consultation is ended. And I think it's incumbent upon Transport Strategy, and I think we will do this, is to contact local members, to have some meetings, to have some engagement and to feed back these issues such that when we get down to a more detailed level of design, that we can highlight these points through the process as we move forward. So I think, yeah, we can't we can't deny that there is the potential for some form of conflict, and that needs to be highlighted. So that'll be my response to the Spen Valley and the mass transit issue. I'm just going to come back off share so I can see the screen, see if any hands or anything have gone up. Would seem not. Okay. So we'll take the opportunity. Oh, just gone a bit. Okay, that's better. Yeah, sorry about that. Bit of feedback. I'll take the opportunity now, seeing as I have the floor, if that's okay, Chair, to discuss Councillor Bolt's second issue that's pertinent to me, and that's the A641 scheme that runs between Huddersfield and Bradford. The scheme is being driven by Calderdale as the authority which geographically has the largest percentage of the corridor, but they are working in partnership with Kirklees and Bradford. I have specifically emailed ward councillors along the route to inform them of the consultation that's taking place. As far as this particular report is concerned, we were concentrating in terms of its scope on Kirklees-led schemes, and as my colleague Richard said to begin with, there are a number of other schemes happening across West Yorkshire. It's a case perhaps of drawing the line. Maybe we should have drawn it to include this A641 corridor. To perhaps address that, I can offer a further briefing, or I can offer some briefing notes to be sent out to the panel, in particular, of course, to Councillor Bolt, and he may wish to talk to me a little more detail about it or provide his thoughts as part of any Kirklees contribution to development of that corridor. So that's the A641 response. There is a further issue that was raised by Councillor Bolt, and that's the Calder Valley Greenway inverted commas extension running from where it ends at the moment to Dewsbury Railway Station. A particular scheme is being progressed as part of the Active Travel Fund Tranche 2 programme. I think it's documented in the appendices to the scrutiny report that the key to Tranche 2 of this particular programme anyway is quick delivery, and the Department for Transport wants that as far as possible schemes to be committed by 2022. So we need to deliver them quickly, and we've therefore proposed schemes that have been selected based on level of design work already undertaken, or whether they're already in another programme in addition to a strategic fit with other policies. And the junction of Aldham's Road and the junction with the, if you like, with the Calder Valley Greenway and the Dewsbury Ring Road with the Ring Road is part of the West Yorkshire Transport Fund M2D2L scheme. And what we'd like to do in this instance is to try and bring that forward with some extra design work and offer some contribution funding to that scheme. So it's not just using roads that are already there, to paraphrase Councillor Bolt, but actually to provide some junction improvements to make that link between the end of the end of the Greenway, I beg your pardon, the end of the Greenway and Dewsbury Station a little bit more safer, more accessible and easier for cyclists to use. The Active Travel Fund will be going to Cabinet in the near future. A KDN is soon to be produced, and all those schemes will be consulted on in the near future. And Councillor Bolt will have opportunity then to comment on the design as well, to get into the detail of those schemes as well. Looking on a more wider basis and not wishing to sound at all like a broken record, we are really keen to get the cycle and walking consultation group set up. It's something myself and Councillor Bolt have spoken about at length. It lies with me, and we at Transportation Strategy need to get that sorted and implemented so that we can have that meaningful discussion, as Richard mentioned, about moving an active travel programme of works forward. And believe me, please, when I say it's not often I try and preach on scrutiny meetings, but please believe me when I say that we are looking to get that done as soon as possible when workloads permit in the very near future. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm really sorry if it's my speakers that seems to be causing some feedback issues. I've taken them off now and I'm just on the normal speaker, so hopefully that's going to be a little bit better. But apologies if you are getting echoes, it seems to be my computer. Okay, it looks like we're going to run over everybody. I hope that's okay. So I'm going to move on to Councillor Eastwood. Councillor Eastwood.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, time is pressing. I think we could have had a 2-hour meeting on each of these little projects, really. So we have to agree with Martin that we didn't get enough information on the respective schemes, really, for this. And it's unless there's a scheme running in your particular patch, you don't have everything to hand. So on that, I mean, coming through my patch and Linley patch is the A629 scheme. And they're saying business case is due very shortly in April this year, so we'll be looking forward just to being kept in the loop on that. It has its detractors. There's this scheme, it's fair to say, particularly with the number of trees, mature trees that are planned to be felled. So one of the questions I was going to ask there is that what mitigating steps are being taken for, or planned to be taken for, the removal of a mature tree? I mean, I've lived in the area for nearly 50 years and the trees are older than me, so they're quite well established. So is it 1 tree per mature tree, or are there 10 trees per mature tree? You know, what are the projections, and where are they going to be planted? Is it going to be planted somewhere in Kirklees, or is it along the chosen path of the scheme? So that's one thing. The other thing was, bear with me, we have a hell of a lot of traffic hit Ainley Top, and it's coming from all directions. It's coming off the M62, it's coming off the Ellen bypass, it's coming up from Brighouse. So we need to be looking at reducing the amount of traffic that is coming in that direction. And I know there was talk of a junction 24A in the dim and distant past, and whether that might ease the amount of traffic that actually heads up and comes off at junction 24. So if there's any update on that potentially happening. And what I'd also like to know is what projections of traffic flow are taken into account on these schemes, in that we've just had a pre-planning application for a mixed retail and warehousing development on Linley Moor. Are they taken into account in these projections? Are all the new housing developments that are not yet in the planning stages but have been earmarked for planning, both on Calderdale side and the Kirklees side? You know, what are the projections based on traffic flow now and what it will be in 5 years, 10 years, that sort of thing? Boom. I think yeah, that's just about it. Because obviously, I mean, we'd rather not see any removal of a healthy, mature tree. So anything that can be done to avoid that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Eastwood. Richard, do you come back on that one?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can come back on that first question on the A629 Halifax Road scheme and the tree issues, and then I'll bring Tim Lawrence back in on Junction 24A and the traffic modelling question, if I may, Chair. With regards to the tree issues, then yes, there are the removal of proposed removal for about 126 what we call arboricultural features. So that includes shrubs, small shrubs, hedgerows, trees. So I think certain figures have been thrown around a bit, which maybe aren't fully accurate regarding the number of mature trees, which is a lot less. We have prepared a full tree mitigation plan that sees around 700 new trees being planted, some of which are semi-mature trees to go back in, and they're all going in along the corridor itself and not spread out across the wider environs of Kirklees. And we agree that every tree needs to be carefully assessed, and that assessment is being carried out as part of a very robust arboricultural study. And that information and the tree mitigation plans and everything else will all form part of our planning application. People will be able to see all of the detail of that and be able to comment on it. We have been contacted by various groups already, and we've shared quite a bit of that information already with those groups, so they can see the detail as well. So I hope that helps answer that question. I'm going to hand to Tim Lawrence for Junction 24A and the traffic projections, Chair, if I may. Thank you.
Hello again, Councillor Eastwood. First question was about Junction 24A. At the risk of stating the obvious, that's a motorway junction and is therefore delivered at the behest of Highways England, working on behalf of the government. They are fiercely protective of the mainline motorway, but that's not to say that we take that protection lying down. It's something we continue to press through our own liaison with Highways England and also through Transport for the North as well. It can be found in various strategic policy documents within Transport for the North, and I think there's a will to progress that. at a West Yorkshire level and perhaps at a Transport for North level as well. But currently, it doesn't feature in any Highways England road investment strategy, which are their investment plans. As I say, we keep pressing for it, but it isn't in RIS2, road investment strategy. But we are looking to see what their response would be for when they start planning for road investment strategy 3, and these are 5-year plans. So the next one comes around about 2025. We're 1 year into RIS2 at the moment. Traffic growth and accommodating demand in the future. So all transport schemes are assessed in line with Government Department for Transport guidance, and that guidance can be found on the internet. We don't, if you like, go our own way. We follow a methodology that is prescribed, and the West Yorkshire Combined Authority undertakes a rigorous and thorough review of our business cases and how we've calculated those our projections and our future demand. So in line with guidance around calculating demand, we calculate a core, a low and a high growth. And in the case of a low growth scenario, this is done to understand whether the intervention is still economically viable with potentially lower growth projections, but those projections crucially are still prescribed by a Department for Transport. So when we're talking about kind of demand on the network, or traffic growth as you called it, we use population, employment and housing growth, and that's our own local plan. Technically that needs to be constrained to temporal across a wider area, but nonetheless we do use our own growth factors. We use car ownership and of course trip rates as well, and these things are set down for us in government guidance and we apply them at a Kirklees level. Okay, that was Chair, that was my response to both Councillor Eastwood's questions.
Thank you. Is it Richard, were you going to say anything else?
All I was going to say was I hope that answered Councillor Eastwood's final point, which is I think he mentioned Linley road developments and housing and employment developments in that area, and they are factored in because they're allocations in the local plan. So in what Tim was saying, that they form part of the figures. So hopefully that became
should have been clearer. Sorry, thank you, Richard.
No, sorry.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Eastwood. Is that okay? A thumbs up. Fantastic. Right, we're going to move on to Councillor Patrick, and I know Councillor Taylor's been waiting patiently with his dog Marley. We even saw Marley, so we're nearly there. So, was it not Marley? It was a different dog. Sorry about that. Councillor Patrick, you've got two. Okay.
Sorry, I won't keep you long, but sometimes when comments are made, it sparks you into wanting to come back. On the 12th of February, when I asked about health and safety audit for deliveries crossing roads, the audit hadn't taken place, and Keith Bloomfield has just said that the audit has now taken place. So I'd like to know why that audit hasn't been shared with myself or Councillor Firth or any other businesses. I've not seen it at all. I'd like to know what the travel time benefit is for Plan B. I've not seen a quantified version of that. The traffic lights at the top of Victoria Street dictate the movement of traffic on Victoria Street. If they're on red, the traffic doesn't move. It's quite simple. Some days there isn't much traffic. On a Monday, there's hardly any traffic at all. I was talking to Joe, who has the off licence today, and he says some days it's like a ghost town. So I could probably have produced a Google shot that wouldn't have served Keith's purpose. So I don't think it's helpful to look at a Google shot of a busy street and assume it's always like that when it's not. Coming to which side of the road the loading bay should be on, the council seems to have created a situation now where there's one side of Victoria Street set against another side of Victoria Street, and that is not, it's a dreadful situation where the businesses, they've moved this loading bay from one side of the street to the other and then back again. and it's a nonsense. I don't favour a loading bay on one side or the other. I think it should be on both sides, and they need to sit down and look at how they can make it work, whether it's offset so that they're not dead opposite one another or whatever they are. And if they can't make it work, and they're seriously saying, I mean, Keith is a highways engineer. He's not in the business of keeping shops or understanding how shops function or understanding how town centres function. So he looks at it from purely a highways engineering point of view, and I get that. But as councillors, we don't. We look at the whole, the holistic, the whole thing. And to my mind, if we are seriously as a council suggesting that we're prepared to let shops close, and that's what's going to happen. I mean, it's a great pity that the shopkeepers couldn't come today. And I understand the technical reasons and all the rest of it, but the shopkeepers couldn't come today and tell you what they tell me about going out of business. Businesses they've built up over the years, they're going to go out of business because Kirklees Council wants to put a loading bay on the other side of the road and not let them load. Now, you need to listen to them. Somebody needs to listen to what they're saying. Peter McBride might just see a Conservative council spouting on here. That's one of the problems with politics, isn't it? Politics gets in the way. I am listening to what these people are saying. I'm telling you the truth as to what they are saying. They are telling me they are going to go out of business. If we have one side of Victoria Street where the shops are blighted, and they will be blighted, you know, the landlords won't be able to let the shops again because any new business still won't be able to park on that side. They won't be able to unload and load on that side of the road. It's going to be blighted. That is not what regeneration is about. Richard Ollinson at the top of his speech talked about wanting to create jobs, and he might have been talking about the construction people. I don't know. We want to create jobs. We want to see growth. We don't want to see the opposite. And that's what we're getting with this scheme. And I've already said, all these other things that are associated with it that are not to do with the easing of congestion, like the area for the market, all these things can be achieved through other sources of funding, government funding. And I've had a lengthy conversation with the MP about this, and I know it's possible. So I'd get down on my knees and beg you if I had to do. Let's not introduce a scheme that puts people out of work and closes businesses. That's not what we want. Thank you.
Thank you. I say, well, let's bring Councillor McBride in first. He's got his hand up. Councillor McBride.
Just wanted to make a quick point. The idea that we might be imposing something on Hove is absolutely wrong. We've had two schemes which have been considered over a period of nearly 3 years now. We're talking, most of what is now proposed is just about meets the criteria set out by West Yorkshire. And therefore, we've been stretching the limits of the criteria. And I've been happy to do that to try and encompass or to include everybody in the proposals that go forward. But ultimately, you've got fundamentally an almost intractable situation, and a compromise is required. Now, there's no evidence of compromise so far, and frankly, there'll come a point, possibly, where West Yorkshire will say Kirklees couldn't make its mind up, so we will withdraw the possibility of having the money. And that's the thing that worries me. I don't want to impose any scheme, and I don't have the ability to impose any scheme. The point is, we do need a degree of compromise here to be able to achieve something, one that might work and which would keep the majority of the shopkeepers reasonably content with the compromise, which inevitably there's got to be.
Okay, Keith, did you want to come back on any of the specifics as well at this point?
Yes, Chair. We'll provide the information. We talked to the councillors a month or so ago, maybe a little bit longer, time is going by, where we've discussed the loading bay report. We talked around a loading bay report where we articulated the pros and cons of the loading bay being on the north side, the south side. So yeah, we'll provide that to ward councillors, no problem at all. And we'll also provide the travel time benefits as well that were declared at the OBC, the outline business case. So we'll provide the information. Yes, no problem at all.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Going to move on to Councillor Taylor. Thank you, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I've been listening to all of the discussion. I've got quite a few comments, and I apologise. It's a bit scattergun because it's a bit all over the place. So I apologise to Richard, Keith, and Co, who are going to respond. there's a variety of things, and I'll just start by following on from what we've just been talking about, which Councillor Patrick and Councillor Firth have been raising around Home Firth. Obviously, Home Firth is an area I know reasonably well because it's relatively close to where I live and where I represent. And I just wonder whether we have looked at all options really, because I heard in I can't recall who said it. Somebody said at one point that there was now contention about which side the loading bay was on, because the Picturedrome, the Bridge Hotel and Magic Rock were now saying they wanted the loading bay on their side, so they covered. And I'll happily defer to the Home Firth councillors who know this better than me, but certainly the Picturedrome and the Bridge Hotel have access in front of them where I've seen lorries parked up and unloading. So they're not actually parking on Victoria Street at all when they're unloading. And I'm not sure about, and again, I defer to Nigel on this, but I'm not sure about the Magic Rock, whether they can get access around the back from Norwich Bottom. So I just don't know, a genuine, but just as an outsider listening who lives locally, and I shop in Home Firth and I visit Home Firth, I'm just sat here thinking, that doesn't feel like my experience, but as I say, I'll happily defer to Nigel if he wishes to come back in. And I was also wondering about another option, and I don't know again because I haven't been involved, so I don't know whether this has been explored or not. But in some parts of the district, and broader, you have time limited loading, so first thing in the morning or later in the afternoon. And I don't know whether that's been looked at as an option. That if there is this contention or this traffic congestion, and I agree with Nigel, sometimes I drive through Home Firth and you whiz straight through. Other times, yes, it's a bit more congested, as that photograph showed, but it's not like that all of the time. So I just wonder, have we really looked at all options, and are we perhaps, not thinking perhaps as much out of the box as one possibly could do on this? And then just one final comment whilst we're talking about Home Firth, and I apologise for being parochial, but the point was made by Keith, I think, about that the footpaths were really narrow and how dreadful this was, and they needed to address that. I just asked him to go and have a look in Flockton, because we do have narrow footpaths in Flockton, but apparently that's perfectly okay and we don't need to do anything up in Flockton. But actually, we're going to try and put, potentially, if what Nigel and Donald are telling us, we could put some businesses out of business in Home Firth because the footpaths aren't wide enough. And yet in Flockton, you have really narrow footpaths where people are at risk, and it's a major A road with huge amounts of traffic. So it just doesn't add up to me. So I can't understand why, whenever I talk about Flockton, I get told it's not a priority for this administration, but it's got much worse pedestrian safety issues than we've certainly got in Victoria Street and Home Firth. So that's my Home Firth rant or comments, if I may. One other thing that is a general point, and some councillors on the call will, and probably some officers actually, will recognise this, that I often raise this, and I do so as as a member of the Democracy Commission, that this council says it's going to put the councillors at the heart of all we do. And yet this discussion we've been having today doesn't feel like, when it comes to transport, councillors are at the heart of everything we do. It feels like at best we're treated like members of the public, and we can comment when we go out to do consultation, but I just remind members and officers that we have a representative democracy and we are elected representatives. And actually, most members of the public don't have the time to read. I mean, Tim, put up a wonderful document that's been produced by the West Yorkshire Combined Authority that people can go and read, and it's available online. Most people don't have the time to do that. They expect us as their elected representatives to do what it says on the tin and represent them. And we should be playing a much bigger role in those discussions. And we shouldn't be fobbed off as we are with we can contribute when they decide to do a public consultation. I mean, Martin has raised and talked about Cooper Bridge, as he does at many opportunities. But I think the point here, it's great to hear that we're getting ready where we may have a preferred option. Surely this committee should be scrutinising that before it goes out for public consultation. I think it's absolutely wrong that they're talking about taking this to consult in May, June before it comes through this committee. Given the size scale of this, the fact it's been going on for 3 years, we have had a number of disagreements, we've had confusion around what exactly is going to happen and when and where. I think there is an absolute role for scrutiny to scrutinise what is being proposed here before it goes anywhere near the public. Because what I don't want is to repeat what has happened already. Because I got people to go to the last public consultation because they held one down at the Combe Working Man's Club, and I was getting people to go to that to comment. And that was, I can't remember how long ago that was. It was a long time ago. And I don't want to go out to residents again saying you need to provide views, because there are people with strong views about this issue, if perhaps it hasn't been properly thought through. And we have a responsibility as councillors and as a scrutiny committee to do what it says on the tin. So let us scrutinise before it goes anywhere. It should not be going out to public consultation until we've had an opportunity to scrutinise it. And again, and I'm sorry, I am quite grumpy about this. I don't know whether it's coming across, but we are representatives of the public. We should be treated as that and not treated as members of the public. And certainly all of us, certainly, you know, whether we're up for election or not, we're bound to be all involved in campaigning when we'll be asking for people to support us or our colleagues and re-elect us to council because we're going to represent them. Well, we need to be doing some representing then, rather than just acting as another member of the public who has a view. So that's my bit of a rant about representative democracy. On a more positive note, going back to the actual report, there's a lot of talk about public transport, and if I dare raise buses. Buses are almost as rare as hen's teeth in my ward, in parts. And one of the problems is that the bus companies, when you talk to them, will tell you that it's not economical to run bus services. And what they do is the bus starts off from Huddersfield, in the centre of Huddersfield, and comes all the way out to, you know, our rural areas. And they say they need to put on big buses, you know, double-decker buses, because the bus is full coming out of Huddersfield. But once it gets beyond Waterloo and out into the more rural areas, there are very few passengers. So they argue it's not economic. And I understand that. Why would you run a double-decker bus all the way out to Shepley or Bird's Edge or wherever it may be, with maybe one person on it? I have suggested before, and I would like some feedback on the thought about why we don't push the bus companies, or perhaps we could fund some of this through some of the money that the major transport schemes and WICA are providing, to have some bus terminuses on the outskirts of the town. So, for example, Waterloo would be a perfect place to have a bus terminus where you could have your double-decker buses come out as far as Waterloo, and then you have smaller buses that then people can transfer to and move further out. And that way you can have services that perhaps are a bit more frequent so that actually people can utilise those services. So I'd like some feedback on that. And then also, seeing as we have the right people on the call, I had a meeting on the back of the place standard work, and as people on this committee will know, I'm a huge advocate of place standards. I had a meeting about transport back on the 22nd of September last year with Richard and with Tim, and despite chasing, we're still waiting for feedback on that meeting. So I apologise for embarrassing them in public on a scrutiny meeting, but both myself and Julie McDowell have been chasing since September for an update, and they were going away to look at options for buses out in this rural area where we don't have many buses. And then finally, I'd just like to make a plea. When I read about the West Yorkshire Transport Fund and the aims of it, I would have thought that the Penistone line would fit very comfortably within this. But if you look at the schemes, and if you just take time to look at all of the schemes that we've got the detail on here, you'll find that other than the Holmfirth one that we've talked a lot about today, there is absolutely nothing, not a single thing that is focused on either the valleys or out in the Kirkburton Denby Dale area. We are neglecting a huge chunk of this district. There are no proposals, no ideas, no investment, no thought. And I think this is something that needs to be addressed, and we as a scrutiny panel should be commenting on that fact, that we are here to represent the whole of Kirklees, not just the urban bits of it. And I think I'll stop there, Chair. I think I've ranted enough now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I don't know who wants to come back on those points. Richard?
Yeah, perhaps if I can field a few of them, Chair, if that's okay. So I think we started with Holmfirth, Councillor Taylor. So I'm going to bring Keith just back in quickly on that one, which was to do with whether we're considering all the options and the narrow footpaths issue.
Yeah, Councillor Taylor, Crown Bottom has been looked at. It's a private road, and there's an issue with the bridge. There's a little bridge that is only got a 2-ton weight limit, so it does need repair, and it does need strengthening for any vehicle of any substance to go down the back and serve the Bridge Hotel. The Bridge Hotel at the moment takes deliveries from stand A in the bus station and takes them across the bridge, because they can't take any big vehicle down Crown Bottom. So that's been looked at and discounted. Time limited parking, when one could argue that with the yellow lines, double, single, everything, we've got time limited parking on there at this moment in time.
Sorry, Keith, I wasn't saying time limited parking. I was saying some areas you have time limited loading. So you can do deliveries before 10 o'clock, or do deliveries after 3 o'clock, or whatever it is, outside of the busy period.
Do apologise. Yeah. That has also been talked about with, and actually that we actually discussed that with ward councillors as well, in terms of can we limit the parking, but unfortunately with bakery deliveries that start at 4 and he has around about 20 deliveries per day. He wouldn't work with us in terms of having a restriction on delivery times. He said he wanted unfettered use. He couldn't dictate. As a small operator, he couldn't dictate when people delivered to his store. That was the same sort of excuse that other people along the road said as well, where they were unwilling to work with us to try to limit the amount of loading and unloading and limit the times when they couldn't unload and unload. So we really drew a blank on that. That was really difficult. Does that answer the questions? We have looked at them though. Yeah, we've got a long list of looking at everything. I've been playing around with this scheme for 3 years, so we've looked at a number of options.
The one you haven't answered, but it's probably a bit unfair really, is the comparison between you're making comments about the width of the footpaths there and the width of the footpaths in Flockton that isn't a priority. But that's all an administration issue rather than an officer one really.
Before I came to Kirklees, I think Kirklees has its own footpath width that is not recognised by many councils up and down the country. So it's not just on Victoria Street. Footpath widths are an issue in Kirklees, I think, and it's the streetscape we live with. Sometimes there's no footpath. So I neither disagree or agree with you, councillor. I think it's a fact.
Chair, shall I come back on the representative democracy point? I think, yeah, I think we're happy to, not happy, I think we'd like to take away, that one, and I'll look at that in ways in which we can improve that. I know the teams try to hold ward councillor briefings when they're at scheme development stage, before the business case submissions and before planning applications. But as you can see, we've got a big programme. That's not an excuse. I'd like to take that one away and look at that one, see if we can improve that a bit. Tim and I are jointly to start work on a new transport strategy piece for Kirklees, and we really want to focus that on the place-based ways of working, and get those local conversations going. So I'll stick with that for the next one, which is we did have a really good chat with Councillor Taylor and made some really good points, and I do apologise we haven't got back to you. We are making a little bit of progress on that. We have an opportunity through the West Yorkshire consultation that I mentioned, where we can feed back suggestions for bus, because they're consulting on bus and the future of bus. And I think we've got a chance now to make a play for that. So we will do that. And we need to make comments back to the Combined Authority by about the middle of April. So that's not too much longer. And we will feed back to you, Councillor Taylor, on that. So thank you for raising it. Tim, do you want to come in? Do you want to come in on transport strategy? But before I do, perhaps I can just pick up on the Penistone Line Railway comment. We have had a few meetings with Councillor Taylor and others about that, and we are looking very closely at the government's announcements for the Levelling Up Fund, and also the same West Yorkshire Combined Authority consultation that's going on at the moment about rail. So I think we've got another 2 key opportunities to put forward our plans for Penistone as part of that. I'll bring Tim back in, Chair. I think he'll be able to elaborate slightly on the sort of approach for the transport strategy.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Thanks, Councillor Taylor, as well. I mean, echoing Richard's apologies, I think you don't need to apologise for calling us out. This is what we're here to do, and we understand that. And I think, in some respects, we do our utmost to ensure that your views are heard and they're put forward at the relevant opportunity. And yes, you haven't had a direct response, and I do apologise for that. But it's not that it's not on our agenda. And I think, as Richard has said, we're looking at it through, and there's no quick fix, is there, to the decline in bus usage across the whole country, and that there's no quick fix to engaging with bus operators and really reimagining our transport system. And I think that's really what we want, isn't it, moving forward. But rather than actually just saying that, perhaps we need to kind of find out a little bit about what the public really wants from their transport system. We have a rich, as you've pointed out already, a rich vein of knowledge and expertise, not just locally from ward members, but also from the place standards and the work that we've done. And one of the things we're looking at before we start talking to people about the transport strategy is looking at that information, mapping it out, finding where the issues are, trying to find some spatial kind of connections and connectivity and coherence around the problems and opportunities. And I don't want to run before I can walk, because I think the engagement part is really, really important. But also, we are fighting the corner, I think, for improved bus services. I know Rich has drawn your attention to the bus service network review that's been done as part of the connectivity strategy. As part of perhaps a more public-facing element of transportation and a more councillor-facing element of transport strategy, I've heard what you're saying, and I think it's incumbent upon us to take those views and to have that conversation with you before the consultation period ends, even though we're not formally responding, as I've mentioned earlier, but we are going to feed in to this work as we move forward and start to take those views and shape really the strategy for what's best for Kirklees. And the things that you say, the meetings we have, it's logged, they're there, it feeds in. And perhaps it's a bit more incumbent upon me to come back to you and to give you that surety that we are fighting your corner and that we are taking on board the things that you say. So please, we've got the connectivity strategy, or the connectivity infrastructure strategy it's called, and those daughter documents, one of which is mass transit, one of which is the bus network review. We've got that opportunity, but we've also got this opportunity to take the place-based work, and we've got that one stage further as we try and start to develop this transport strategy, and perhaps look at those hub and spoke operations you mentioned earlier, where you take the double-decker bus out to those areas, and then you have feeder rural buses, such as they do in a number of European countries. You know, it's successful there. Surely it must be successful in some way here. So, you know, we can do a little bit of work around seeing what that means in advance of the transport strategy. I can commit to that.
Just the one final point that I raised, which I'm not sure who's picking up, to be honest, is that, you know, when we look at what is here, there's a dearth of investment or thinking about the south of the district and the valleys. And for me, the one big thing that's missing is anything, and we have talked about this before, Tim, I'm not saying anything we haven't talked about before, and that is a strategic link south out of Huddersfield. You know, we need a link to South Yorkshire, a better link down to South Yorkshire. We need a link out of Huddersfield south to the M1. And, you know, there is nothing in here that looks anywhere near that. And that, to me, is a missing piece of the jigsaw. I mean, I said back in the days when we talked about the local plan that the plan was one-eyed because it looked towards Leeds and didn't look more broadly towards Manchester and Sheffield as well. And I still think to an extent we do that. So the one plea from me is when we are looking at transport strategy, we look in all directions. We don't look just towards Leeds and Bradford.
Okay, I was kind of looking at the chair there, and Councillor Apple kind of moved forward as she was going to say something, and so did Councillor McBride simultaneously. Councillor Taylor, I think you're right. Okay, let's not prolong me just trying to placate you, because that's insolent at the end of the day. I think I hear what you're saying, and as with all these things, it's logged. There's somebody else on the call actually watching it on YouTube. They're taking these notes. Okay, it will be fed in. If I may say so, Councillor McBride has been extremely vocal about looking to the south, about the Penistone line as well, about the connections north-south, not just east-west, when we have spoken about the connectivity infrastructure plan. And I say that to provide an example of the fact that the authority is thinking about that. But I think it's maybe about time that we just made sure through this process that we're kind of levelling up that type of thinking. So that we're looking at north, south as well as east and west. Okay, I won't drag that out any longer, but please, it's noted.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor McBride, did you want to say anything, because you've popped?
No, undoubtedly we want better links with South Yorkshire. We've tried. I've been over to South Yorkshire to talk to them about a joint approach to develop the Penistone line and other linkages. So the initiatives have come from Kirklees to improve things, but it's not been a priority within West Yorkshire. In fact, not this local plan, the previous one, they had a map of rail lines in West Yorkshire. The Penistone line wasn't even on the map, never mind any reference to it. Martin will remember me making that point very emphatically, saying what sort of a game we're playing. It's a very serious line, yeah. And I've always taken it seriously. And you know, Martin, that's been true over a decade. I've been banging on about it.
I never said you decayed, Peter.
Well, I would. Yes, I would. Anyway, but very concerned about it. And clearly, we do not only look to Leeds and so on. Predominantly, we will inevitably within West Yorkshire, because we're part of the West Yorkshire structure. But beyond that, we do keep reminding them, Kirklees has got boundaries which encourage us to look outwards towards Manchester and towards Sheffield. And during my time, they've been made very conscious of. I think they've been here and been talking about it.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Councillor McBride. I've still got a couple of other points, so please Please bear with me. I know a couple of members had to leave at 4:30 and they're still here, bless them. But if you do need to go, then that's fine. Andrew Bird, who's one of our co-optees, he's been having problems with his internet, but he just had a couple of comments to make, so I'm just going to read those out, and it is in reference to this item. So he's made 4 points. While understanding the 5-case model of approval and review, it would be good if these sequential documents could be made available to the public as part of the engagement and communication process. Number 2, working with the combined authority seems to make visibility much poorer. Can anything be done about that? Number 3, the appendix seems to be out of date and needs timelines revising. Number 4, there seems to be too much focus on the civil engineering and not enough on the software, as in communication, improved public transport services, signage and engagement. I think some of those points were covered earlier, but just for fullness, Richard, did you just want to come back on any of those, or do you want me to read any of it again?
No, thank you, Chair. Got that. Excuse me. Yeah, working with the combined authority. So I'm not entirely sure, I think, what Andrew was meaning with that one, but I think it's probably because once you submit something in there to their assurance framework process, including these big business case documents, that it goes through a process internally on their side, and it isn't really until that sort of the combined authority officer recommendations are made and it goes up to the transport committee, where it's a more public facing process, you can sort of see it. And even then, I think they summarize some of the information that gets through to that point, because they deal with so much information probably. So a bit of a difficult nut to crack, that one, but I think like comments have been made by members of your panel, some of that probably rests on our side. And, are we able to find a way, although we're sprinting sometimes towards these deadlines, where actually we can share some of that information, on our website or something like that, just to make it a bit more accessible. So I'll certainly be able to go away and have a look at what we're allowed to do around that. And I'm happy to take that one away. Appendix 1 out of date, I can only apologise. I mean, things are changing all the time. I did caveat the report by saying, these major projects, things change all the time. If I could give you a version today, probably out of date next week. But again, I think we can look at our website. We are doing that. We're trying to work with our communications teams to make that better. The civil engineering focus, yeah, I do get, but I know from working in it, I mean, I'm not a civil engineer. I work with the guys on this, and they are really taking a multidisciplinary approach to all these things, including looking at place making and place shaping. Excuse me, losing my voice after all this, and talking with highway colleagues about signage and things like that, particularly within the town centre regeneration programme. So we're looking at signage in the town and decluttering that and improving that as part of our public realm programme as well. So that's where the transport programme and the town centre regeneration programme meld nicely together. So I can assure Andrew, I'm sorry he hasn't been able to stay on long enough, but those things are being looked at. So I hope that helps.
Great, thank you. So Richard, just a couple of other ones here. So I'm just checking the summary document that we got from the members of the public, just to check that we've covered everything or as much as possible off. I know we can't necessarily cover everything, so if you just give me a second, I'll just go through these to check. So one of the questions was around whether the transport team will accept written evidence and scope incorporation into design amendments of evidence against A629 Huddersfield to Ainley Top scheme prior to any further decisions, or engage in ongoing discussion about scheme design detail, especially tree conservation. Now, I think what you've said on this is about the planning process, but would there be any other options for people to provide design amendments before then?
So thank you, Chair. I think I did answer this question earlier.
Oh, sorry.
So no, but perhaps not in sufficient detail. So I'm happy to provide a bit more clarification. I think look, we're always happy to receive comments, but we are on a very, we're on a programme, and as schemes get to a latter stage, it is more difficult, obviously. But I think I would say, if comments can come in that are, helpful for us to take on board. There's cut-off dates every day, isn't there? So a planning application, for example, you have to finish the documentation and submit it, but the process doesn't stop there. I think, the planning application process itself, which I mentioned, provides that opportunity. We'll certainly be looking at all the comments there. There's life after the planning application process as well. And, right through to when, contractors are on the ground, we can be looking at trying to make tweaks, improve things. I think I've got to be honest though, it's much easier to take on board things in the early evolution of schemes rather than right at the tail end. But we will do our best with comments that are sent through to the team.
Just a few quick ones then. I think you've said that the outcome of assessments in relation to A629 scheme will be made public. Yeah. The other one that was asked numerous times, will there be an independent carbon audit of the A629 scheme? Yeah,
there has been one. Well, we've prepared one, working with consultants to do that, which I think was one of the other questions. Do we use consultants? Yes, we do. Actually, a carbon impact assessment, having seen a few of the first sort of major full ones now, it's actually a pretty specialist task in itself. They're not that they have a lot of factors to take into account, and obviously we've aimed at producing one that's robust enough to go through the planning application process and the scrutiny of that, and that has been carried out, and that will be made available with a planning application.
And that's independent.
Yeah, that's been carried out. Yeah, obviously it's been carried out for us. We've paid for that. But it's been carried out, taking on board all the information, by a professional company, and that will go through the planning process to be scrutinised and assessed fully. And also, I did say as well that the Combined Authority will be carrying out their own independent audit on their side of things, because that scheme's also in the assurance framework.
Okay, a couple of comments just to take note of. Friends of Earth mentioned the induced traffic effect in relation to the scheme, and then a couple of comments about there's reservations about several aspects of phase 5, particularly in relation to demand at the moment. I guess they're talking about traffic demand currently.
They are, yeah. I think Chair Tim Lawrence answered this question under Councillor Eastwood's question, I think, which I think it sounded very similar wording, so it may well be the same sort of question.
Same question.
So I think we've dealt with that one.
Okay, and I think you've already covered about journey times that are unlikely to be improved. So that's come up a number of times. And then the other thing was around just local stakeholder involvement. So the forum, the cycling and walking forum, I know it has been discussed in previous scrutiny committees, and it'd be useful just to see that moving along, really, because quite clearly there's a good group of people who want to be involved, and I think it is important that we engage as many people as possible in all these schemes. It doesn't mean that we're always going to do absolutely everything what they say, but we must try and do as much engagement with people as possible, really.
Yeah, we would agree with that. Yeah. And we will come forward with our plan based on that last scrutiny item for active travel, particularly, but also the other transportation stuff. I think the transport strategy work that Tim referenced is a really good opportunity to have a full conversation around transportation and pick up place-based conversations with people. So that's our hope and intention with that piece of work.
Okay, thank you. So there's one final question from Councillor Bolt, who's going to be very quick, and then Councillor it's one I think for Councillor McBride anyway, and then you can come back on that if that's okay, and then that's it. We're going to just cover
Martin,
the work programme.
Come on, Martin.
If I've got to be quick then, Chair, I want to thank you for the way that you've chaired this meeting for the whole year then. Yeah, Peter, I mean, we've been around the issue of Cooper Bridge, so as a member and as a panel, can we ask then that a position statement is passed through Cabinet so that we get a formal decision that the 3 options that were consulted on have been pulled back, that whatever that, they're looking at another option, and that option will not involve the decimation of the Kirklees woodland, which was said earlier. If it's not passed through Cabinet, obviously it doesn't formally exist, and you know that we've been around this for a while, so I think it'd be useful for everybody. It would give some clarity to the residents who've frequently attended, but also it would give some peace of mind to businesses who, for the last 3 years, the White Cross pub, the hairdressers next to it, have lived in uncertainty about what's happening, and householders in that area. So if Cabinet could acknowledge that the 3 options consulted on, and listening to the public, however it's phrased, but those are now off the table, as you said a while ago, and as Shabir contradicted you by saying it was only your opinion. Clearly, you've had great influence on this, and we thank you for that. But can we take as a democratic decision, so it's noted, and that's then passed to WICA, that everybody knows where we're going? Thank you.
The scheme that was considered, which I personally pulled only in this sense, that at a given point, when I saw how many trees it was going to involve, I said, there's no way that any committee is ever going to approve that, so forget it. Now, that made everybody fall back on all the other alternatives, and therefore it was necessary for a period of time to consider all the alternatives. That's where a degree of confusion might be. However, of course, this scheme was what should we say? It's not time related in the sense that it had to be brought forward immediately, because as part of the West Yorkshire Transport Fund, it's what you say. It's expected that that's going to come forward at the latest point, or one of the latest points. It was always so programmed, so there wasn't that degree of urgency. The point I wanted to bring up was the fact that, with regard to trees and carbon, etc., I think it should be pointed out again and again that whatever we do, West Yorkshire will force us to abide by their own climate change agenda, and they will hold us accountable for literally every proposal, and will judge it in terms of its impact on climate change. And that is without reservation. Schemes have already been pulled back right across the board from each district to ensure that they did meet that criteria. This one will have to go through the same process. So without reservation, we are deeply concerned about the climate change issue. I just want to make a passing aside. Do you realise that the committee, I think it was only 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, approved the improvements to the Transpennine, which will involve the loss of 1,000 trees. There was one objection. Now that seems to me totally disproportionate when there's been this concern, when there's a net massive gain in trees. This is the A629, and we've heard nothing. I mean, I've personally answered 150 letters, if not more, and additionally answered loads and loads of questions about this. And yet there was one objection about this 1,000 trees that are going to be lost because of the programme that's going to go from Huddersfield to Ravensthorpe. I do find that absolutely amazing. It's true that many of these trees would be, well, they're often referred to as weeds because they're not specifically grown. Nonetheless, they are trees, and they do contribute in climate change, well, using that as a major criteria. I would have thought people would have been worried about that. I certainly was. And undoubtedly, versus will not be our scheme, it'll be Network Rail scheme. We will certainly want to know exactly how they're going to compensate for that 1,000 loss. But I would have thought the public might equally have been concerned, at least as much as they are over a net loss of about 20 trees in Edgerton. And it's interesting, I've answered all these, and I used to live on Edgerton Road for about 20 years. So listening to people who I know live nowhere near there and really are just picking up on a lobby, it seems to me disproportionate that there is this degree of concern over one road and a total disregard in another part of Kirklees. I just don't understand it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bolt, did you want to follow up? But I do want to move on now. So.
Yeah, I do, Chair, and I very much appreciate it. Peter, please will you take the decision that you have rescinded the 3 schemes, so there's a formal cabinet note. At the moment, yeah, we accept your word, we accept what the officers said, but until there is a democratic decision, the only decision that the cabinet have made in that is to go out to consultation on 3 schemes which are being pulled. So for the sake of democracy and accountability, will you take that paper to cabinet that said that we're now looking at an alternative and those 3 schemes are being pulled? Thank you, Chair.
It's been before members again and again, the fact that their officers are currently looking at alternatives, and when a formal proposal is made, which will be in the not too distant future, it will be presented to you almost as soon as I get it, I assure you.
Okay, Keith's got his hand up as well, so we'll just let Keith come back in and then we'll start rounding up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still here. Yes, I attended an executive team a few days ago when the topic of Cooper Bridge was discussed in full. And the decision that ET executive team made is that we would take it back to Cabinet. So we will take the preferred option back to Cabinet, which answers, I think, Councillor Bolt's questions. That will be done around summertime. Can't give you an exact date, but it will be taken back to Cabinet.
Thank you. We'll get there eventually, Chair.
Thank you, Keith, and thanks, Councillor McBride, on that. That's very helpful. So we've had a very detailed discussion on this, and I want to thank everybody really for the time. And I know we've run over, but it was a really useful discussion. Some very important points made about particular schemes. Some points made about the plans that have been presented to us, and I understand actually everyone's very busy at the moment, but for some, and we did ask for a general update. To be honest, there we asked for a general update on all the schemes, and perhaps because of that we don't have as much detail as some members would have liked. So that's something for us to think about as a panel, about whether we want to focus in on some schemes sort of going forward where we could get some more detail. Obviously, there's quite a bit about representation, making sure councils are involved early on in schemes. That's quite an important point, and obviously quite a lot around the some of the infrastructure around these schemes and engagement, and also around public transport. Some discussions around the south of the borough, the valleys, and making sure that they're not missed out when we're looking at these major schemes. Obviously, we've had some strong representations here from the public, so we know this is something that a lot of times we say that we don't get enough engagement, and here you go. Here's something that's going to touch a lot of people in one way or the other, and it's really important that we engage with people as much as possible. And also that everybody understands what's possible and what's not possible, and just we can be factual about the schemes as well. Just on climate change, obviously this is very important for the local authority, for West Yorkshire Combined Authority. I do understand why there are sometimes concerns from the public on this when we're talking about big road infrastructure. I think the good thing here is that the walking and cycling schemes are integrated into transport. That's really, really important. But I guess it's just seeing all that sort of come together. And for us, just for our future, at some point we have to move away from the individual petrol car relay, and that's there's a lot of things that have to come together on that as well. But I'll just leave it. I'll just leave it at that for now. So we'll see how we sort of get on with that. But thank you, everybody. I really appreciate everyone's comments and stuff. Thank you. John needs to leave. Just before you go, John, just so we're quora, I'm just going to move to the plan for the work programme. Does anyone have any? Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everybody.
Have we got anything to do before the end of the year, Chair?
This is thanks, Keith. Thanks, everybody. This is the last meeting before elections. Now the elections have been announced and by government. So I just wanted to check if there's anything else that anybody wants to add to the work programme. Don't have to do it right now. We can obviously send us information by email, and we can make sure that's shared with members as well. But does anyone have anything to say right now about the work programme for next year, next council year? No?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just hope to be sitting on that side where Peter is now as cabinet member next year.
No comments.
I'm going to go if that's all right. Apologies, Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
For next meeting.
Thanks, RP.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Okay, so we are done now. So thank you, everybody, for joining the session, and we'll see you in the next council year now. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, RP. See you later.